If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, The Quest and Goodbyes. Camp Half-Blood, September 10, 1999. Okay Odysseus, I need you to remember and try to repeat the prophecy the oracle told you as good as you can. My father said in a more serious tone than usual. Sure. I replied to my father and started remembering the prophecy which the oracle had dictated. After I had it ingrained in my memory, I spoke aloud. In dreams of shadows, his father speaks. Whispers of labors, 9 to achieve. On an 8-year path that he must brave. Alone, cursed soul seeks to save. Through trials echoing ancient lore. The journey unfolds, a quest evermore. Well, it seems like a pretty simple quest to decipher, right? Thalia couldn't help but say as she sat on one of the chairs at the deck table. Yes, it doesn't seem to have a lot of mystery. The second verse is obviously saying what you will have to do, that being 9 labors, and the third verse obviously means that this journey could take up to 8 years. My dad interjected, however. My father continued, the other verses are a bit tougher. Yeah, like the first one where it says that your father speaks to you in your dreams. I mean, that is pretty straightforward, but we don't know who your godly parent is. Thalia said. I think I know what that could mean. It has only happened twice, but I have seen in my dreams a thing that said was my dad. I said while raising my arm slightly. How come you didn't tell me this? My dad asked me. Well, the second time it happened was today, and the first time I didn't think much of it. Besides, no matter what that thing said, you are still my dad. I replied to my father's inquiry. Well, that is another verse down. Thalia sighed as she sunk more into her chair. The verse that says alone cursed soul probably refers to you, and that you must do this quest by yourself. My dad said with slight nervousness evident in his voice, since most quests were done by 3 people. Wait, alone? We can't be sure that is what that means. Thalia said while countering my father's words. No, I feel like what my dad said is correct. I replied, trying to calm down Thalia. I don't know, I don't like it. Thalia said as she grabbed the chair somewhat fiercely, splintering it slightly. Let's move on to another verse. I couldn't help but say, trying to steer the subject away from something that would put Thalia in a bad mood. Okay, the finishing is a cursed soul wish to save. My dad said, so maybe this quest is to save me from my curse. I couldn't help but question aloud. But what curse do I have? I continued, I mean, sure, I was born blind, but with my new sight in some aspects I can see even better than normal demigods. I guess we won't be able to figure it out, and it must be something that comes later on in your quest. My dad said. After finally deciphering as much of the quest as we could, I decided to start packing for the long journey ahead. I first gathered supplies and put them in different backpacks, then I placed the backpacks inside my shadow, something I had been able to do after my chair had sunk into it a few months ago. After that I went to the forge and grabbed one of the better bows and arrows, along with a quiver that replenished itself with the arrows it already had, so as long as I never broke any I would always have the same amount of arrows. I continued preparing myself, and finally, after the distinct shadowy mass of the sun started setting, I was finally done. Welp, I guess it is time to finally leave. I couldn't help but say as I sighed while looking at the shadowy valley which I had called home and hadn't left since my birth. Just be careful, okay, and remember to call camp with a golden drachma at least once a month so we know your status. Thalia said a little shyly beside me. Yeah, I know, don't worry, my dad gave me enough golden drachmas to call him every single day for the next 2 years if I needed to. I said while slightly giggling about his anxiousness about giving me all the drachmas he owned so I could call him all the time. I wasn't worried. Thalia said, but you know, you were my first friend, so I would be kind of sad if you died. Thalia continued as her voice slowly turned into a whisper. What did you say? I couldn't help but tease her, since she never acted this way and was mostly arrogant all day long. You can be such a pain sometimes, you know that. Thalia said while lightly smiling. I know. I replied while nodding continuously. Come on, get in the car, the 100i hunk is waiting for you. Thalia finally finished saying as she led me to the car which would take me to Long Island and then shoved me in it. After shoving me in, Thalia slammed the car door shut behind me, as she said something which I couldn't hear, as Argus started diving off. Hey, Argus, I am gonna take a little nap, wake me up when we get there, okay? I said to the camp's number 1 resident. Was all I got a response from the 100i giant, which I took as a yes, so I slowly took a nap and had the greatest pleasure in the world take me. Odysseus dreamscape. My eyes fluttered open and I looked around me, seeing the scenery which I had already seen twice before. Oh, not this again. I couldn't help but say as I let out a sigh. What do you mean, not this again? The deep all-encompassing voice said as eyes started appearing all around me. I mean, how many times are you gonna pull me in here? I replied to the voice, which was supposedly my godly parent if the prophecy was right. Hey, a lot of demigods would love it if their parents talked to them like this. The voice said somewhat angrily. Okay, sorry for not being all excited to meet my godly parent who comes out as a bunch of eyes and talks to me for like 2 minutes. I said towards the voice somewhat sarcastically, since I knew gods couldn't do any physical harm to a demigod in their dreams except for maybe hypnos. Would this form be more pleasant? The voice said once again as the eyes started merging in front of me and formed the figure of a singular huge eye and a long mouth with the pointiest thing I had ever seen. Okay, God, you are starting to freak me out a bit, so just tell me why you pulled me in here. I said, trying to get down to business. Well, what makes you think I just wouldn't want to talk to you? The deep voice said, well, for one, you have never done that before, and secondly, you are a god. Most gods don't chat with their children. I replied to the eye and mouth. Kiddo, I ain't most gods, but you are right, I am here for business. I shall be the one to give you your labors, including little hints to get you started on each one. My godly parent said somewhat proudly. Oh, so you will be the one deciding what monsters are gonna have the chance to kill me, isn't that fatherly? I said sarcastically. Listen to me, you little she. The voice said as the entire space trembled from his voice, and for once I was actually shocked, since he seemed to be able to affect me even in my dreams. Calm down, you know what Nyx always says. The voice said as the space slowly stopped its shaking. Well, kid, your first labor will be to hunt the Caledonian boar, based on the hunt of Meleager in Atalanta. You will find your prey in one of the national parks. The voice said in a final tone, as it seemed to have enough of me since I sunk into the shadowy ground. Thalia POV. I guess he's gone, hey. I said while sighing as I saw the car leaving with both Argus and Odysseus. I guess so, my child. Chiron suddenly said as he seemed to appear out of nowhere. You know, if it was at any other time that would have probably jump-scared me, but not now. I sighed once again. I then felt a strong callus-filled hand lay on my shoulder as it slowly grazed my black hair, which reached my shoulders. Don't worry, he is my son and I have taught him well. Also, how about you take a few days off? Chiron's soothing voice reached my ears, but I could tell he was holding in his nervousness, a nervousness which could only be experienced by a father, and even at this time I couldn't help but feel a little jealous of Ozzy. No, let's get back to training. I said, concentrating now onto what Ozzy would want me to do, and also beat his ass when he came back. Author note, I'm begging you, so gimme your power stones out, baby. Chapter 22, A Blind Kid in Long Island. Long Island, 10th of September 1999. My eyes fluttered open as I felt Argus' hand nudging my knee. I looked at him and only received a hum as a response as he signed that we were here, the car coming to a stop. Thanks, Argus, keep the camp in good shape for me. I said to the hundred-eyed giant as I left the car, once again only receiving the giant's usual grunt as a response as he quickly left with the car in the direction to camp. Well, I guess I should start with figuring out how many national parks there are, or at least buy a map or something. I said aloud as I started gathering mist around me and implanting my will into it so I would be invisible to mortal eyes. With it being my first time in my life ever leaving camp, I started first just by walking randomly across the city, trying to figure out where I could purchase a map of the US and its national parks. After 30 minutes of continuous walking, I saw a huge building with a sign saying Target on it. Let's try this place. I couldn't help but think. I pushed open the glass doors, revealing files upon files of times. This place could probably have it. I thought to myself. I started wandering across the store, seeing different items which I had never seen before, all of them provoking a slight amount of wonder in me. I finally reached a section where it seemed I would find what I was looking for. I rummaged through the line of maps and grabbed a few I found interesting until finally my sight caught onto a map that read National Parks USA. I looked at the piece of paper in front of me and all the spots on it, and I couldn't help but sigh aloud. Well, looks like I have a few to look over. I couldn't help but think while seeing the 63 different underlined sections on the map. I carefully started placing all maps I had gathered into my shadow while I stared in fascination as they sunk in. Then, with the mist cloaking me from any prying eyes, I left the store while doing some minor theft, since I didn't think anyone would mind losing a few maps. Okay, let's look at this map again. I said aloud while I sunk my hand into my shadow and grabbed my desired map. I looked at it and started thinking to myself in which place the Caledonian bore. According to its myth, the boar was said to be huge, bigger than some of the smaller trees, so I started by crossing out the smaller parks, since even though mortals shouldn't be able to see it, the destruction it would cause would still draw a lot of attention. Then according to the myth, the boar was sent by Artemis to attack the city of Caledon, which was situated in the west. The boar most likely would also be west following its first orders, I thought to myself while crossing off the national parks situated at the east of the US. Well, that eliminates a few from the list, I whispered aloud as I looked at the map once again with fresh eyes whilst checking off mentally the national parks that wouldn't make sense. I guess I should start with the biggest one, Wrangell St. Elias, Alaska. I said with conviction, since the other three biggest national parks after it were also situated in Alaska. Just as I had made my mind, I placed the map into my shadow, at the edge of what my sight could catch, 7 monsters rushing at me through the streets. A body of a stag, the neck of a lion, with cloven hooves, and a wide mouth with a sharp, bony ridge in place of teeth. Look, Rokatas, this is going to be fun. I said aloud as a huge grin formed on my face. I decided to wait here for my pursuers. I started gathering even more mist around me so as to block the views of the mortals as best as I could, and at the last moment of my preparations had been completed, the 7 Rokatas showed their faces as they turned from a corner a street away. I summoned from my own shadow 5 shadowy tendrils. So why are you coming after me? I asked the monsters as they stopped before me when I had summoned my tendrils. Nothing much, you smell too good. A Rokata said while salivating profusely. Hey, I am just 9, don't let Artemis hear you say that. I said sarcastically. Hey, don't you think he smells similar? A Rokata at the back of the pack said aloud. Now that you mention it. The Rokata that had spoken before said as it sniffed the air with its giant nostrils. Yes, he does smell like her, doesn't she? The Rokata continued. What the hell are you guys talking about? I questioned the monsters before me. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. The salivating Rokata said in unison. The pack of monsters suddenly dashed at me. I quickly summoned my spear from my tattoo, it magically appearing in my hand. Let's do this! I yelled with a wide grin. I controlled my tendrils to slap away the first attack of the monsters' advances, but they seemed to react too quickly for my tendrils to actually hit them. I decided to go into the battle myself. I tensed my legs to the maximum I could and slammed my back foot against the ground, slightly breaking the pavement. I dashed at the Rokata who was closest to me and enclosed its sides by using my tendrils, which also worked as a way to not having to deal with the others. The monster, at seeing it was slightly cornered, didn't seem to back down. It stomped its cloven hooves and rushed its head, opening its mouth wide open, ping in for a bite at my shoulder. Just as I felt I was close enough to the monster, I changed my grip on the pole and pierced through the monster's neck and through its brain. I retrieved my spear quickly, the body of the monster already disintegrating, with the only aftermath of our one-on-one being the blood trickling down the spear. Using my shadow tendrils, which now only worked to block the Rokatas from me, I decided to envelope myself in a cocoon, and just as I felt the monsters attacking the dome of tendrils, I opened slight windows for me to attack at them through the cocoon. Little by little I whittled their numbers until only one was left. I felt the monster lunged at the dome once more, probably fueled by its own monster instinct and vengeance for its fallen pack members. I dissipated the shadowy tendrils around me, letting the monster through, but just as it was in the middle of its lunge I sidestepped it and slashed down with my spear, decapitating the monster instantly. It quickly disintegrated, but a small puddle of blood formed beneath where it had been killed. Well, that was as good of a warm-up as any. I said while I unsummoned my spear, the tattoo of a Greek helmet reappearing on my right hand. I started stretching my arms to the sky, and said in a questioning manner, now, how the hell do I get to Alaska? Author note, sorry for not uploading yesterday guys, had some stuff to do, also I am not really good at writing fight scenes, but I do hope to improve just like everything else in my writing. THX for reading, gimme power stones PLS, it is very much appreciated. Author out *. Chapter 23, Alaska and Me. Alaska, 12th of September 1999. Finally here. I said aloud as my breath became visible because of the cold. After getting to an airport I then smuggled into a cargo plane, since that was the easiest way I could get to Alaska. The plane left me in Anchorage. From there I got into a cab and told the driver to take me to Wrangell St. Elias. After reaching my destination I paid him with what I like to call mist money, which is just using the mist to change what bills they could see, and changed my $1 bills for $100 bills. I decided to get it over, and with the shivering cold around me, I entered the forest. 4 days later. Well, do you have any clue how much longer it will take us for us to reach the monster? I asked to the bear I was sitting on. Yes, Master, its normal hunting spot is still a 2-day walk from here. The bear, whose name was Kuma, replied in a deep grunting voice. Still, you'd think that your family would have already hunted it down if it was such a big threat. I said to the bear while I laid on its soft back as it walked through the forest. We have tried once before, but we lost 4 of our brothers in the fight and we weren't even able to injure the being. Kuma said with a somewhat sad voice. Well, don't worry dude, I am gonna vanquish this thing for you, let's just hope I scare it off and OT doesn't come back here when it leaves Tartarus. I said to the fluffy killer below me. I hope so as well, Master. Kuma replied while grunting. 2 days later. While riding in Kuma's back, a few hours ago was finally saw a few marks from the monster's passage, which I thought was the boar from what Kuma had described. Kuma sniffed the air and accelerated as it seemed to catch onto the monster's scent. Finally my sight caught something in the distance, a huge shaggy wild boar, of vast weight and foaming jaws sharpening its 2 huge tusks on different trees. Kuma, stop, don't get any closer. I whispered to the bear below so as to not capture the boar's attention. Yes, Master. Kuma slowly came to a stop a few dozen meters behind the boar. I slid off his back and told him thanks and to get back to his family. After that I unstrapped my bow from my back and drew it to full draw, placing an arrow on its string. I let out a shallow breath, clearly viable because if the low temperatures, and released the arrow, it flew through the air and impaled the side of the boar's head. Off! The arrow didn't seem to have enough force behind it to pierce the boar's tough fur, and as the boar's red aura around it intensified and started sniffing the air, I quickly placed my bow and quiver into my shadow, since the first arrow was more of a test to see how strong the skin of the boar was. With a swift motion, I summoned my spear, its form materializing from the intricate Greek helmet tattoo on my hand. The weapon felt right in my grip, an extension of my will and determination to overcome the monstrous boar that now charged towards me, its red aura pulsing like the blood of the earth. I sidestepped its first charge, the ground shaking beneath its weight. The boar was fast, but I was faster, my characteristic demigod ADHD keeping me one step ahead. I thrust my spear towards the beast, aiming for its eye, the only vulnerable spot I could discern. The spear found its mark, but suddenly a slight fire surrounded the creature, and the weapon was repelled as if striking solid rock. As I looked at the fiery and red aura coming together and surrounding the boar, I couldn't help but curse under my breath as I came to a realization. It's the wrong fucking boar. I whispered aloud, the cold biting my tongue. The boar, which I now recognized as the Erymanthian one instead of the one I needed to hunt, turned, readying itself for another charge. This time, I called upon the shadows, my own silhouette stretching and twisting into 7 tendrils of darkness. They lashed out, entwining the boar's legs, but the creature's fiery aura seemed to be a direct counter to my shadows, and it broke free, its aura burning away the shadows as if they were mere wisps of smoke. As the boar prepared to strike again, I feigned a stumble, baiting it into thinking I was weakened. It charged, and at the last moment, I rolled away, using the creature's momentum against it. The boar crashed into a tree, the tree splintering, breaking, and falling to the snow-covered grass, but still the boar was dazed, and that was enough. Seizing the opportunity, I leapt onto its back, gripping the fur with one hand while driving my spear with all my might into its neck. The boar thrashed wildly, but I held on. The red, fiery aura flickered as it slightly burnt my clothes and skin, the aura then dimmed, and with a final, desperate effort, I pushed the spear deeper. The boar let out a shuddering sigh, its aura extinguished, and then it collapsed beneath me, defeated, then slowly it started disintegrating, going back into Tartarus. I stood, panting, the cold air burning my lungs. The Erymanthian boar, one of the 12 labors of Heracles, a terror of the forest, I had managed to kill it. Still, what are the chances of finding the wrong legendary boar? Like, come on, this is so unfair, it should totally count for my first labor. I couldn't help but slightly cry with my ragged breath. I unsummoned the spear back into my hand, the Greek helmet tattoo reappearing on my hand. As I stood there still contemplating how unlucky I had to be to find and fight the wrong Greek boar, Kuma started running at me excitedly as he saw me triumph over the beast. You did it, Master. Well, at least one of us is happy, I said while smiling slightly at the grizzly bear, who had been my guide in here. Author note, unlucky Odysseus also, I can go the distance, song, Hercule. I am on my way, I can go the distance, I'll be there someday, if you send me stones. Chapter 24, I Fight a Giant. 1 month later. Alaska, October 12, 1999. I was twiddling a golden drachma through my fingers while I formed a shadowy rainbow with the mist in front of the back seat of the bus I was in for my next destination, Denali National Park. I threw the drachma into the rainbow I had formed, and as it sunk in I began reciting in ancient Greek omega rho iota, theta epsilon tau omicron rho iota delta omicron, pi alpha rho alpha delta xi omicron upsilon tau nu pi rho omicron sigma phi omicron rho nu mu omicron upsilon. O Iris, goddess of the rainbow, please accept my offering. I thought of Thalia, and soon a picture of the daughter of Zeus appeared in front of me as she seemed to accept my call. Hey Thalia! I said while slightly raising my hand to her. Hey, Ozzy, how are you? Thalia asked me with a small smile on her face. Pretty good, I am going to Denali now, how about you? I replied and asked the girl who I hadn't seen in more of a month. Well, 1 week after you left, I got a quest of mine and got this little awesome lady. She said excitedly as she walked around and showed me a slightly bigger goat than usual. It's Amalthea, the quest said. She's my guide, she came to camp for me. She said excitedly while pointing and hugging the goat's fluff. Wait, the goat that gave milk to Zeus, that thing is still alive? I couldn't help but ask as a somewhat envious look overcame my face since I wanted to touch the legendary goat too. Yeah, she still is. Thalia said, while Amalthea bleated approvingly. So aside from getting a legendary goat mom, who did you choose for your quest partners? I asked Thalia, somewhat weirded out since I hadn't seen head or tails of her quest mates. According to my prophecy, I am going to meet both of them on my quest. Thalia replied. I wonder who they'll be. Thalia continued. I am sure that when you meet them you will know, though let's make a bet. I bet that one of the kids will be a child of Hermes. I smirkingly said towards the image of Thalia. Okay, I bet that one of them will be a child of Athena. Thalia said smirkingly. Fine, whoever wins the bet gets a free mist manipulation on the other. I said to Thalia. Sure. She replied as the rainbow call started dimming and then shut off. Just as I was about to get some shut-eye, since I was still a few hours away from Denali, a sudden snowstorm appeared around the bus, and at the edge of the site a dark silhouette of a 40-foot man with a pulsing red aura surrounding it appeared. The snow intensified and the bus was suddenly sent swirling across the road. Skrrrrrr crash. The screams of the mortals around the bus, the screeching of the tires and the swirling of the storm created a cacophony of sounds that seemed to intensify as the silhouette at the edge of my sight started walking closer towards me. I quickly pulled my arm backwards and broke the window next to me, leaping out of the crashed bus. The snow started dying down, and my sight focused onto the giant silhouette, a man over 40 feet tall with dragon-looking legs, long braided hair, an armor that seemed to be chained through links, and in his right hand a huge metallic staff that seemed to have a lot of precious stones around it. What the hell is that? I couldn't help but question as I looked upon the enormous figure standing only a few meters before me. Why hello, cousin, nice to finally meet you after all the disturbances you have caused in my territory. The giant figure said. What are you? I yelled towards the giant. Oh, that is disappointing, how could a cousin of mine not recognize me? I am the great Alcyoneus, the bane of Hades and Pluto. The giant, now identified as Alcyoneus, said. Wait, Alcyoneus as in the giant from the Gigantomachy, how the hell are you here? Also, what was that about Pluto? I couldn't help but question to the giant. You don't need to know that, since sadly mother wants you dead. Alcyoneus said. The giant then started gathering a snowstorm once again, and we disappeared from the spot we were previously on. We then appeared in a new place, a glacier. Welcome to my fortress, Hubbard Glacier, which will for you will also be your doom. Alcyoneus said as he raised his staff towards me. As Alcyoneus's voice boomed across the icy expanse, I steadied my breath, and summoned the spear from my tattoo on my right hand. The cold shaft of the spear filling my grip perfectly as 7 huge shadowy tendrils materialized from my own shadow. We will see whose doom this place shall be, I retorted, my voice a stark contrast to the giant's thunderous declarations. The snowstorm swirled around us, a tempest conjured by Alcyoneus's will, as all around us shadowy shades, clad in armor and weapons of different that didn't seem Greek with weirdly no aura at all, started appearing. Let's see how you deal with the warriors which I killed in the past. Alcyoneus said with a huge evil grin. I wasted no time. With a fierce cry, I lunged forward, the spear cutting through the icy air. The first of the shadowy soldiers met its end upon my weapon's tip, dissipating into a cloud of dark mist. The tendrils followed suit, striking with precision and grace, each movement a dance of death for the shades that dared to approach. Alcyoneus watched, his eyes narrowing as he observed the ease with which I dispatched his warriors. With a growl of frustration, he joined the fray, his staff a blur of motion as he sought to overwhelm me with sheer force. But I was not so easily bested, after all I had been trained since birth. Each strike from the giant was met with a defensive maneuver from my tendrils cracking the glacier beneath us since I wouldn't have the strength to block the giant's attacks on my own. The battle raged on, the clash of our weapons a symphony amidst the howling winds. As the fight continued, I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, the relentless chill of the glacier threatening to slow my movements. But within me, a fire burned, fire fueled by determination and the will to survive. In a moment of clarity, I saw an opening. Alcyoneus, overconfident in his strength and numbers, had left himself vulnerable. With a shout that echoed off the walls of ice, I thrust my spear forward with all the might I could muster. The weapon found its mark, piercing through metal links in the giant's armor and into the flesh beneath. Alcyoneus roared in pain and anger, his staff swinging wildly in an attempt to retaliate. But it was too late for him. My tendrils wrapped around his form, binding his extremities and leaving him immobile, which weirdly left all other the Shade Warriors immobilized as well. With a final effort, I pushed the spear deeper, thick blood which smelled like oil gushing out of the giant's wound like a waterfall and onto my child body. I pushed the spear even deeper and with a pop his heart was destroyed, the giant falling onto the glacier beneath us, with the Shade Warriors dissipating. Hey, that was easier than I thought it would be. I huffed as I leaned onto my spear while I looked at the giant's body which didn't seem to be disintegrating. I kept looking at the body at the giant, when suddenly I noticed something. The giant wasn't dead, the wound which I had formed quickly closed and I slowly walked backwards as Alcyoneus began to rise once again. Ready for round 2, cousin? Alcyoneus said as he cracked his neck and the Shade Warriors appeared around us once again. Chapter 25, Bane of Hades vs Son of Darkness. Alaska, October 12, 1999. Ready for round 2, cousin? Alcyoneus said as he raised his staff once more, the Shade Warriors surrounding us once again. Well, shit. I couldn't help but sigh while leaning on my spear, as I quickly summoned my tendrils once again. With a battle cry that pierced the cold silence, I leapt into action. My spear danced through the air, finding its mark in the heart of the nearest Shade Warrior. It dissipated into a cloud of darkness, my tendrils moved quickly and skewered some of the surrounding Shade Warriors. The others followed, their numbers endless, but my tendrils were tireless. They struck with precision, each movement felling a handful of Shade Warriors at a time. The Shade Warriors fell, one by one, but Alcyoneus was patient, his eyes tracking my every move. The giant moved like a force of nature, his staff a deadly pendulum that sought to crush me beneath its weight. I parried and dodged with the help of my shadowy tendrils, the ice cracking beneath the might of his blows. The Shade Warriors, though fallen, were not defeated. They rose again, their forms reconstituting from the darkness around us. I was tiring, the cold biting through my armor, sapping my strength. Alcyoneus saw his chance and took it. With a roar that shook the glacier we were standing on, he swung his staff with devastating force. I raised my tendrils in defense, but they were quickly crushed under the giant's might. I quickly raised my spear as my last line of defense, but it was a futile gesture. The staff connected with my torso with a sickening crunch, and pain exploded through my body. As the world spun, I was sent flying across the icy floor. Alcyoneus's triumphant bellow was the last thing I heard before the darkness took me. The cold of the glacier was a distant memory as I succumbed to the void, my consciousness slipping away. Narration POV. You fought well, cousin. The red-haired giant said to the unconscious form of the 9-year-old demigod as he stood before it, looking at the body with eyes of approval. Alcyoneus raised his iron staff once more, the light reflecting from it and onto his rusty-looking skin. Farewell, cousin. The giant said in a deep voice that shook the earth as he let his staff fall onto the black-haired boy. Boom. Alcyoneus raised his staff which had hit the glacier's floor, and as he looked at the spot where he expected there to be a squashed body of a 9-year-old demigod, what he saw instead was just cracked ice, no body, no blood, no splatter. What the hell, where did he go? Alcyoneus questioned to himself as he looked upon the place where the demigod had fallen. Without warning, an eerie voice started projecting itself all around the glacier. Alcyoneus quickly looked around to find the source of the voice, and what he saw was the demigod which he thought he had crushed standing while slightly stumbling a few meters away from him. Song Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure Heart Incantation Mail Cover, Umber. If you wanna have the spooky feel I envisioned, you guys should definitely listen to this while reading the next part. The 9-year-old boy slightly opened his mouth as words started coming out it in the same eerie voice as before, but this time something more powerful, more primordials started talking. Omicron pi lambda iota omicron nu sigma beta sigma omicron nu tau phi sigma omicron upsilon, opal dim your light. Kappa omicron upsilon epsilon tau nu pi alpha lambda lambda alpha gamma nu tau eta nu, hear this fatal plea. As the eerie voice spoke in an enchanting manner, Odysseus' normally completely white eyes started filling themselves with black, first the pupils, then the irises and finally the sclera, filling the child's entire eyes in shadowy darkness. Omicron tau nu mu mu omicron nu tau omicron Cairo nu omicron upsilon pi iota tau epsilon nu omicron nu tau epsilon, spur the sands of time. Kappa alpha tau pi nu epsilon mu alpha lambda epsilon theta epsilon rho omicron nu pi omicron iota omicron nu tau epsilon, and set the spirit free. Mu alpha rho alpha nu epsilon iota kappa alpha sigma pi epsilon tau alpha iota, wither and decay. Tau epsilon lambda epsilon upsilon tau sigma alpha tau epsilon tau nu mu omicron rho alpha nu tau eta nu, and this destiny. Odysseus kept on singing the Greek hymn as his shoulder-length long hair started going upwards as if by magic, and his shadow started growing and growing, exponentially. What the hell is this? Alcyoneus questioned as Odysseus' shadow reached his feet. Sigma pi sigma alpha tau epsilon tau gamma epsilon iota nu omicron mu nu alpha lambda sigma epsilon iota, break these earthly chains. Kappa alpha tau pi nu epsilon mu alpha lambda epsilon theta epsilon rho omicron nu pi omicron iota omicron nu tau epsilon, and set the spirit free. Tau pi nu epsilon mu alpha lambda epsilon theta epsilon rho omicron nu, the spirit free. Odysseus stopped singing the hymn. Alcyoneus, as he stepped on the shadow, felt a sudden tingle across his spine, and deftly raised his staff and summoned his shade warriors from the fifth cohort once more. The shadow beneath Alcyoneus' feet began to swirl, forming a dark vortex that seemed to pull at the very air around it. The giant's eyes widened in alarm as the shadowy tendrils rose like serpents, wrapping around his legs, anchoring him to the spot. Odysseus, now silent, watched with those abyssal eyes as the shades which the giant had summoned earlier began to dissipate, their forms unraveling into wisps of darkness that were absorbed by his growing shadow. The air grew colder, and the ice beneath them creaked and groaned as if alive. Alcyoneus struggled, trying to free himself, but the shadow was relentless. It crept up his body, enveloping him in its cold embrace. The staff in his hand glowed with a faint light, the only beacon in the encroaching gloom. The giant roared, "I'll come back, demigod, I will kill you." Words of fury and desperation left his mouth, but it was quickly muffled as the shadow covered his mouth, silencing him. His eyes, filled with a mix of rage and fear, were the last to disappear into the darkness. As the shadow claimed Alcyoneus, the glacier fell silent. The eerie, primordial voice that had filled the air was gone, and in its place was a quiet that was almost deafening. The only movement was the gentle fall of snowflakes, each one seeming to avoid the spot where Odysseus stood, the epicenter of the shadow that had claimed the giant. Odysseus' hair settled back onto his shoulders, and the darkness in his eyes receded, leaving them a stark, empty white once more. Once Odysseus seemed to have returned to normal, his body fell forward unconscious onto the glacier's freezing floor. Place uncown, time uncown. Erebus. A womanly voice bellowed out across the infinite space which both beings seemed to be occupying. "You got involved in my matters, brother, you shouldn't have done that." The womanly voice continued yelling. "Gaia, you know that I normally don't care what you do, just like Nyx, but this time you had gone too far, sending one of your children with brother Tartarus after my own son." A deep voice which seemed eerie, similar to the one which had sang the hymn before, said to the primordial gods of the earth. Gaia breathed heavily in and said in a somewhat stoic manner, "You know as well as I do that thing shouldn't exist." "Maybe so, who are we to tell, but that thing is still my child, and unlike you that actually means something to me." Erebus replied. "Now begone, you wench." Erebus said somewhat jokingly as the silhouette which Gaia had taken in this place started disappearing. Author note: hoped you liked this chapter, I honestly really enjoyed writing it, also gimme power stones please, I need my adrenaline rush. Chapter 26, A Camp? 1 Labor Down. Hubbard Glacier, Alaska_Canada, October 27th. My head is killing me. I couldn't help but say as I grabbed my forehead and slowly stood up on the glacier floor where I had been laying unconscious. I looked around and wondered, where the hell is Alcyoneus? I asked aloud while my hand sunk into my shadow and grabbed a bottle of nectar. I slowly started drinking the heavenly drink which alleviated my headache a bit. After that I inspected my body and was fascinated to find out that aside from my headache I was completely uninjured. After getting myself together, I sensed something in a somewhat close distance, an amalgamation of mist all concentrated at one point, something I found weird, so I decided to start heading there. 30 minutes later. After I continued walking towards the amalgamation of mist, I couldn't help but be dumbfounded at the sight. A giant camp, similar to Greek camp but weirder, as in the style didn't fit what a Greek camp should look like. I walked through the camp, and I saw buildings nominated as the Senate, and 5 building each called a cohort with an assigned number. All of these structures had a style similar to Roman with arches and curves instead of the straightness that came with Greek architecture. I continued walking until I arrived to the point where all the mist amalgamated. A building dominated the 5th cohort. I slowly opened the creaking door. In the middle of the building, attracting mist like a moth to a flame, was an eagle statue with the letters SPQR inscribed on the back. I grabbed the statue of the eagle and couldn't help but wonder, what the hell is this, and what could SPQR mean? I wondered aloud. As I held onto it, small arcs of electricity started appearing around the eagle and striking the ground. Is it something from Zeus? I wondered once again, but the eagle's electricity only seemed to get wilder at my conjecture. I quickly stashed it into my shadow, since that was the only place where I thought it would be safe, until I found what it actually was. 3 weeks later. Denali National Park, Alaska, November 14th. Well, it took me 2 whole months, but finally I got you. I said as I looked upon the creature which my first labor had decided I needed to slay, a huge, dreadful boar as big as an elephant, burning, bloodshot eyes seemed coals of living fire, and his rough neck was knotted with stiff muscles, and thick-set with bristles like sharp spikes. A seething froth dripped on his shoulders, and his tusks were like those of a mammoth's. Discordant roars reverberated from his hideous jaws, sigils all around the boar's skin which looked similar to lightning bolts, and lightning belched forth from his horrid throat. I dodged to my right, the lightning blast from the boar burning a dozen trees behind me. Looks like this guy will be tougher than the Erymanthian boar. I sighed while summoning my spear and shadow tendrils. Another arc of lightning was spewed forth by the boar. I quickly used my shield, and redirected the lightning away from me. I then dashed at the boar and lunged, striking its head with my spear. Just as I was about to make contact, the boar's sigils on its fur started glowing, which stopped my spear in its tracks. I backdashed at seeing that my attack had failed, but the boar didn't let any room for me to recover as it charged at me tusks first. I sent my tendrils towards the boar, the tendrils wrapping themselves around the boar's tusks and stooping it in its tracks. The sigils on the boar's fur started lighting up again, so I quickly sidestepped as my tendrils dispersed and the boar continued its charge. Okay, why is this dude harder to beat than a literal giant? I couldn't help but exclaim at seeing that the boar seemed to be the perfect counter for my abilities. Roar. The boar seemed to answer me as it roared furiously while lighting gathered at the back of its mouth once again. As the boar released the lighting which had gathered in its mouth, the expected beam of lighting didn't come. Instead, the lighting seemed to slowly exit his mouth and started covering his body in arches of lightning. Well, I guess I should try my newest move too, I said in reply to the boar's power. Shadows from the surrounding trees suddenly flew towards me, pouring into my body and filling it with power. Deep in my subconscious I heard the distinct sound of a shackle breaking. With a resounding war cry, I hurled my spear, with the new strength given to me by the shadows which had entered my body. The boar roared in accordance and rushed at me, imbued with the essence of lighting itself. My spear flew through the air, through the lightning, through the sigils and then through the boar. With a resounding crunch, the boar collapsed onto the floor, its momentum pulling the boar through the ground until it reached my feet. As the boar came to a stop, it slowly started dissipating into ethereal light, going back towards Tartarus. In the boar's place was a fur cloak with the same sigils as the boar had. Hey, this is gonna come in handy, I said while grinning from ear to ear at seeing the remains of my first labor. Author note: sorry for the short chapter, had a lot of stuff going on and I couldn't make it longer. Hope you all enjoyed it. Also send me Power Stones XD, I need my adrenaline rush. Chapter 27, Second Labor. Odysseus Dreamscape, Uncount Time. I opened my eyes and realized I was once again in a dream with my godly parent, at least if the thousands of giant eyes surrounding me were any indication. A deep primordial voice suddenly started reverberating across the infinite space. Hello son, you did a good job completing your first labor. Before the voice of my godly father could continue, I interrupted him and said, wait, 1 second, you are Erebus, aren't you? My father's voice stayed quiet for a moment, and then replied, indeed, I am. Well, at least I got that figured out. I mean, I already had my suspicions, but Alcyoneus saying I was his cousin only confirmed it, since he is a child of Gaia and Tartarus, while the only other 3 primordials who are at their levels is Erebus, Eros, and Nysx, and since I have shadow and darkness based powers, it is the most rational guess. I said while slightly scratching the back of my head. You know you could have just asked, right? I wasn't keeping it a secret. Erebus said while his eyes slightly closed as if he was laughing. At his words I couldn't help but slightly shrink back in shame since I hadn't thought of that, funnily enough. Trying to change the subject, I asked, also intrigued, can you tell me about my mother? Your mother? Hey. Erebus replied. Her name was Edna Atonal, she was a demigod, a daughter of Aphrodite, but weirdly enough she didn't act like one. My father continued. Wait, my mom was a daughter of Aphrodite, that means I am part of their cabin. I said while slightly shivering as my Ming thought of Emma and the rest of Aphrodite kids who always pinched my cheeks. Ha ha ha. Erebus laughed, you really act like your mother sometimes, you know. Father, what happened to my mother? I couldn't help but ask the primordial entity of darkness and shadows. Well, when you were born. My father started saying, but suddenly before he could continue the space we were in started shaking profusely. This was a good chat, Odysseus, pretty good name by the way, although not what I would have gone for. Erebus said, but the space continued shaking even more. Your next labor will be to slay the Stymphalian Birds, a flock of man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers that can shoot like an arrows, based on Hercules' sixth labor. The hint for this labor is that they follow the flight path of black kites. Just as my godly father finished explaining my next labor, I sunk into the ground and the space around me shattered. Motel in Alaska, November 28th. How the hell should I know the black kite's migration path? I said slightly frustrated at my newest labor. Trying to take my mind of the labor for a few minutes since I was pretty tired after I had killed the Caledonian boar yesterday. I started gathering mist in front of me, forming something similar to a rainbow. I then grabbed a golden drachma from my shadow and prayed in ancient Greek, Omega Rho Iota, Theta Epsilon Tau Omicron Rho Iota Delta Omicron, Pi Alpha Rho Alpha Delta Xi Omicron Upsilon Tau Nu Pi Rho Omicron Sigma Phi Omicron Rho Nu Mu Omicron Upsilon. O Iris, goddess of the rainbow, please accept my offering. I thought of Thalia and Amalthea, the divine goat. Slowly a picture started forming in front of me, a city, a slightly bigger goat than usual, at her side a girl around 11 years old, and on the side of the girl was a boy with short spiky hair with an intense orange aura around him. As I looked at the boy at Thalia's side, I couldn't help but feel weird at the sight of the boy. Hey Thalia! I said towards the picture. Thalia seemed to jump in surprise and turned around, a smile forming on her face. Hey Ozzy! She said excitedly while Amalthea berated in a happy tune as soon as she saw me. So, how's your quest going? I asked Thalia and her companions. Before she could answer me, the boy around 13 years old who stood at her side asked suspiciously, who are you? I looked at the boy for a few moments and replied, I am Odysseus, though my friends call me Ozzy. Has Thalia never mentioned me? I asked towards the boy. Oh, that Odysseus, yet, Thalia has mentioned you a few times. The boy said. And who might you be? I asked. After all, it is rude to ask for someone's name without giving yours. Before he could answer, Thalia seemed to notice the slight tension in the air, or rainbow in this case, and said quickly, he is Luke Castellan, one of the companions for my quest. But tell us how your quest has been going. Well, I finished my first labor, so that's cool, got this sweet fur sweater. I said while slightly pulling on the sweater I got from the Caledonian boar. Aside from that, I fought a giant a few weeks ago that almost killed me, but he suddenly disappeared when I lost consciousness. Wait, you almost died? Thalia yelled, berating me. Yet, but don't think about that, look at this sweet sweater. I said, trying to calm her down. After some more berating from Thalia and promising her that I'd be more careful, I ended the iris message. I then grabbed another golden drachma from my shadow and threw it at the rainbow. I chanted the hymn and thought of my father. An image of my dad in his study reading a book formed. Hey Dad! I said a little awkwardly. My dad took his eyes off the book and looked through the rainbow projection. Hello Odysseus! He said in his iconic soothing voice. Sorry for calling you so soon, I know that we talked less than a week ago about the giant I fought. I said to my dad. Don't worry about it, son, it is always good to hear from you. My dad replied while slightly smiling at me. Well, I wanted to ask you too, Dad. I said. Sure son, shoot, as you young kids say. My dad said, and I couldn't help but slightly grabbed my head at his antics. Well, the first thing is, since you are so knowledgeable, I wanted to ask, do you know the migration path of black kites? I asked somewhat awkwardly since I had absolutely no information on the subject. My dad started scratching his beard and replied, I mean, I know some of the basics on it, they are the most numerous species of raptors in the world, so they have a lot of different migration paths. The most common one would probably be from Nigeria, then through West Africa, then through Spain and into Shachia. My face looked slightly dumbfounded at the dump of information my dad just unloaded on me, but then a huge smile formed on my face and I said enthusiastically, "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." As I was about to hang up the call since I got the information I needed, my dad suddenly asked me, "Didn't you have a second question?" While he smiled lightly, "Oh yeah, do you remember a camper by the name Edna Atonal? She was a child of Aphrodite." I questioned my dad. "Edna Atonal, My dad started scratching his beard and closed his eyes as if in thought. After half a minute of silence he opened his eyes and said, "Yeah, I remember her now, Edna Atonal. She came to camp for the first time when she was 12, got chosen for a quest when she was 16, and left camp like all half-bloods do when she reached 20 years of age. Does that answer your question?" My dad stated. "Yeah, thanks Dad, you really are the best centaur ever," I stated as I cut the call. Well, I got a few answers to my questions and I guess I have my next destination in mind, Nigeria. Author note, hoped you liked this chapter a little longer than yesterday's at 1330 words. Without this obviously, Odysseus does get slightly jealous over Luke, lol, and he also asked Chiron about the eagle he found, but he said he knew nothing. Just wanted to add 2 more things. I have an auxiliary chapter where I explain Odysseus' powers and equipment. Also for Odysseus' male parents I will use Dad for Chiron and Father or Godly Parent for Erebus, since he still and always will consider Chiron his true father. Chapter 28, That's Not Flying, That's Just Falling with Style. Song for this chapter: Hecate Music, A Cowardly Warrior. Cargo Airplane, December 1st. Seriously, I hate having to go on these. I grumbled while laying on one a big cargo box eating a can of Pringles. I had been going from flight to flight for the past 8 hours and right now I was flying over in the Atlantic Ocean. On the way back I honestly think I should try to get on a passenger plane again. I mean, sure there are a lot of people there, but I don't know, I think it would be better than this. I grumbled once again while stretching and sitting up. I finished my can of Pringles and threw it into my shadow, then my sight caught something: 3 huge 10-meter serpentine creatures with scaly wings and 2 back legs. Oh come on, Trojan dragons, what the hell did I do? I couldn't help but complain, so I summoned my spear into my right hand. I can't help but wonder what the hell the pilots are seeing. The dragons landed onto the plane, their talons and claws digging into the aircraft, ripping the metal sheets from the sides of the plane. Roar! They both roared as they drove their heads into the aircraft. I started gathering shadows around me, and infusing them into my body, filling me with power. I then summoned my tendrils from my shadow, extending them, trying to control the damage the serpentine dragons were doing. The biggest dragon, which was as big as a bus, busted the cockpit. The pilots, which were trying to control the descending aircraft, flew out at the sudden change in pressure. "Oh, heck no!" I said as I stretched 2 of my tendrils, quickly catching them. One of the dragons, which was able to get inside the aircraft, bashed into me as I was saving the pilots, loosening my grip on them, and flinging me outside of the plane. The wind howled in my ears as I thankfully had my special sight, which allowed me to keep a close eye on where the Trojan dragons were. While I was spiraling out of control, one of the dragons dived towards me with his mouth wide open. I sent my tendrils toward it, ensnaring his mouth and wings. I used my tendrils and latched myself onto the dragon's back. It started raging out of control as soon as I set my feet on his scaly back. "Time for you to go, you overgrown snake." I grabbed my spear and sunk it into the dragon's head. Roar! A roar of pain left his mouth as I impaled the dragon's brain. At the dragon's roar, the other 2 dived toward me. The bigger one bashed into me, which flung me off one of the dragon's back, but the job had already been done. The wind continued spiraling me and clinging me around as the 2 remaining dragons encircled me. The smaller of the 2 dragons dived at me, its mouth agape. I sent my tendrils towards the dragon, encircling the dragon's wings. With a swift motion I pulled myself onto its underbelly. "And another one bites the dust," I said as I plunged my bronze spear into the dragon. With a sudden pop, its heart exploded and the eyes' hearts lost their lively glow. A few moments later the dragon started dissipating into Tartarus. Now only the last dragon remained, and with a roar infused with anger and fury at its fallen brethren, it charged, and I braced myself, my tendrils reaching out once more while the wind hit my face. They found their mark around the dragon's massive jaws, and I hauled myself onto its back. "Let's see how you like this," I said, my voice steady despite the dragon's movements. I tried to steer the beast, my tendrils pulling at the corners of its mouth, but the dragon had other plans. With a sudden jerk, it headed straight for the water, determined to shake me off. I clung on for dear life, my tendrils straining against the dragon's strength. "No, you don't!" I shouted, but it was no use. The dragon plunged into the ocean, the impact forcing my tendrils to lose their grip. I was thrown clear, the cold water enveloping me, dragging me down into the depths. "Oh shit, I am in the water, I am in water!" I yelled at the sudden thought of what my dad said would probably happen if I ever went into a sea or ocean. The dragon circling below me in the depths started to rise, its mouth open wide. I infused all my shadowy tendrils into myself, my body being filled with more power than ever before. I drew my spear and threw it into the water, cutting through the water currents, then the dragon's head, then its brain. Slowly the dragon disappeared. I unsummoned my spear, my Greek tattoo appearing once again on my hand. Now I am in the water with no way of getting to land. I whined aloud. Just as I finished speaking, the thing my dad said would happen if I ever went into the sea happened. The waves started growing bigger, currents started appearing out of nowhere. A monstrous wave crashed over me, sending me spiraling down to the sea floor. I pushed against the water, desperate for air, but the sea was a cruel master. "I need air," I gasped, my voice barely a bubble in the vast ocean. Each time I fought my way to the surface, a new wave, towering and fierce, thrust me back into the depths. My lungs yearned for oxygen, and I could feel my strength slowly leaving me. "Ugh, I hate you, Poseidon," I choked out, as the water filled my mouth, silencing my wrath. The current dragged me further away, deep into the ocean's cold heart, where light and hope seemed to dim more every second. Creator's thoughts. Jonjudo. Hope you liked this chapter. Also gimme power stones please, I need my daily shot of adrenaline. Comment. 6 comment. Vote. Chapter 29, Family Dinner. Atlantic Ocean, December 1st. Gug, I gasped for air while underwater. A stupid idea, I know, but lungs couldn't take it anymore. The water surged into my mouth, slowly drowning me, while I couldn't do anything to stop it, but struggled pointlessly while flailing my limbs. The pressure was immense. I felt as if my lungs, heart, my entire chest cavity was about to burst from it. I could feel the oxygen leaving my body, my brain, my muscles, everything was failing. Yet one single thought remained: how petty can one god be? My sight started failing, but without warning a current formed in the water. It seemed to have a mind of its own as it grabbed my legs and pulled me even deeper. The current crawled up my body, it started entering my mouth, nostrils, any orifices it could find, and I lost consciousness. 30 minutes later. My eyes opened frantically, I could feel my chest slowly rising up and down, but something weird was going on. I was still underwater, in a room made from water itself. "Oh cousin, you have finally woken up." A powerful voice resonated in the water room. The water spiraled in front of me, and slowly the picture of a man, with a long beard, with 2 crab claws and antennae coming out of his head, if it could even be called that, since he was just a head. "Come along, cousin, it is almost time for dinner," the being said with a gravitas comparable only to the one I had heard from my father, Erebus. A current gathered around me, dragging me as the watery head moved along the walls of the watery structure. As the head dragged me, I couldn't help but notice at something which I almost marveled at. I was breathing underwater. I lifted my head and realized something as I looked at the being. He didn't have an aura around him. I started filing through my memories of Greek mythos and realized who the being in front of me was: Pontus, primordial, an embodiment of the sea itself. "So Pontus, why did you save me?" I asked one of the oldest entities on existence. "Oh, you figured out who I am, hey?" Pontus said, a smile forming on his watery head. "The reason why I saved you is because Poseidon can be too petty sometimes, those times that are unreasonable. I save mortals or demigods who have been wronged. Normally I just make them wash up on land, but since we are family I think it would be good to get to know you," Pontus ranted. "Thank you," I couldn't help but say as I lightly bowed my head at the deity. "Don't worry about it, after all just having the same name as one of his past foes doesn't warrant you dying," Pontus clarified. We reached a huge room of water where 4 other beings seemed to be seated on a table. "Hello, cousin." A female watery being, with only half of her body formed, 2 crab claws on her head, and seaweed for clothes, said with a gentle smile forming on her motherly face. "Thalassa," I wondered, directing myself to the entity at the end of the water-formed table. "Indeed cousin, nice to finally meet you. It seems you have angered 2 of the pettiest gods, Poseidon and Gaia, my mother." Thalia replied with a motherly smile. Gaia? How the hell did I anger Gaia? I questioned. Oh, don't worry about that, future problems require future solutions. Pontus said at my side. Come on, when are we going to it? A voice coming from another being at the side of the table whined. Now Erebus, you are already an old deity, don't act like that. Pontus led me at one of the seats on the table. Sitting on water felt weirder than I thought. I kind of thought it felt like how sitting on jello would be like, jiggly but solid enough to use. So Odysseus is it, how did it feel being suffocated by the ocean? A male god without an aura around him said, intrigued. Khaos. Pontus said with a slight glare. Don't worry Pontus, I said while slightly stretching my arm at the primordial. Well, Khaos, if I had to describe it in one word I would say excruciating. Everything is excruciating, the pressure, the lack of oxygen, everything. I finished as my tendrils formed behind me. Is that good enough for you? I continued with a light smile towards the entity that embodied the dangers of the deep. Yeah, that's cool, interesting way to describe it. Khaos replied. After that we continued making idle chatter on the table as seaweed, kelp, and other plants started surfing into the room. It was honestly less weird than you would expect it to be, eating with kelp and seaweed. I mean, the part of the gods was still pretty weird even for me. We finally finished eating the food and Pontus dragged me away with him, while the other deities stayed seated and talking idly chatter, like a normal family would. Dragging me through the water I could finally see the magnitude of the place I had been staying in, a palace taken straight out of The Little Mermaid made entirely out of water. Well, cousin, it seems like we had a good time, all in all. Pontus said in a deep voice. Yeah, I did have a good time. I replied to the personification of the sea. Still, while I did save you because of my rules and morals, that doesn't mean that was the only reason. I received a kind of prophecy from Tiresias which said I would save you. Pontus said in a fatherly tone. Well, I still thank you, cousin. I said as I slapped the watery head by my side. Can I take you somewhere? Pontus asked me. After all, I can't leave you in a place with water surrounding you since Poseidon could still come after you. Pontus continued. Yeah, could you bring me to Nigeria? I asked somewhat shamelessly. The best I can do is the Ivory Coast at Abidjan. Pontus replied. That's perfect. I said towards the primordial by my side. Currents started gathering around me, and with a slight nod from the primordial, water rushed at my back and started pulling me forward, faster and faster at each passing second. Author note, Joan Judo here. Pontus saving Odysseus isn't something out of this world. He is described in the Theogony as a man who is true and doesn't lie. Men called him the old man because he is trusty and gentle and does not forget the laws of righteousness, but thinks just and kindly thoughts, besides getting a prophecy from Tiresias. Hope you enjoyed this chapter. Also PLS give power stones, I wanna go up the ranks *. Chapter 30, Africa, let's hunt some birds. Ivory Coast, December 2, 1999. I saw as I quickly started reaching a coast. Slow down, slow down, slow down. I couldn't help but yell as I saw the quickly approaching land. The water continued pushing me at top speed without slowing down even the tiniest bit at my yells. I finally reached the coast, the currents pushing me out of the ocean, sending me spiraling out of control, rolling through the sand. I rolled on the ground. When I finally stopped rolling through the sandy coast, I stood up slowly, my head slightly dizzy from the journey. I hate sand. I huffed while patting the sand off my clothes and hair. Well, I guess I should. It's time to start hunting for these birds, I said with a resounding sigh while thinking of different possible ways in which I could find the flock of black kites and therefore the flock of Stymphalian birds. I received weird looks from the people on the coast, so I decided to envelope myself with mist so as to not stick out. Within a 30-minute walk I reached the city of Abidjan. I thought of trying to find a place for migration birds or bird spotters, yet I couldn't help but slightly lose hope, since I found no clues of any kind. With no beginning clues to go off, I decided to call someone. I started forming a rainbow from the mist in front of me and threw a golden drachma into it. Omega rho iota, theta epsilon tau omicron rho iota delta omicron, pi alpha rho alpha delta xi omicron upsilon tau nu pi rho omicron sigma phi omicron rho nu mu omicron upsilon. O Iris, goddess of the rainbow, please accept my offering. I prayed to the goddess of the rainbow and thought of my father at the camp. An image of my father practicing his archery quickly appeared. Hey Dad, I said to the image of my father with a huge blue aura surrounding him. Hello son, my dad said as he let his bow down. Dad, I was thinking, do you know of any ways or people that could help me find the black kites here in the Ivory Coast? I asked my dad. He started scratching his beard, probably thinking of something that could help me. He then responded to my query. If things haven't changed in the past 600 years, the Pygmy tribe should still be over there. As for where exactly, I am not really sure. With how things have evolved, they could have changed places, but if they are in the Ivory Coast, they should definitely beat Abidjan, since that is the center of Ivory Coast. Thanks, Dad. I said while trying to think of where the tribe could be nowadays. My dad cancelled the rainbow call and I started thinking of how I could try finding the Pygmy. I walked aimlessly around the city trying to think of a way, or if I should just search the entire city. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the bustling city of Abidjan. The streets were alive with the sounds of evening traffic and the air was thick with the scents of street food and ocean mist. I wandered through the city, my mind racing with thoughts of the Pygmy tribe and the elusive black kites. The information from my father was a start, but finding a tribe that had potentially moved locations over centuries was like searching for a needle in a haystack. As I walked, I noticed a peculiar bar tucked away in an alley. It was an odd place for a bar, away from the main streets and the lively crowds. The sign above the door was old and faded, but I could just make out the name Le Sabo Cash. The words on the sign started changing forms and letters into ancient Greek, Kaparo Upsilon Pi Tau Nu Upsilon Psi. The Hidden Hood. I translated that as a pretty weird name. I couldn't help but think. I pushed open the door and was immediately struck by the contrast between the outside world and the interior of the bar. It was dimly lit, with a warm, inviting glow that seemed to welcome me in. The people in the bar seemed to be huge muscular men. As I opened the door, they all turned to look at me. Then I noticed something. The men, aside from having an orange aura around them, had the mist slowly swirling around them. I concentrated and dispelled the mist surrounding the men. The tall men, who had seemed like giants at first glance, now stood no taller than 1.5 feet. Their skin was dark, they all were 1.5 foot tall, yet the thing that showed their identity was their leather jackets, which spelled Pi Upsilon Gamma Mu Alpha Omicron Iota, Pygmy. It was obviously the Pygmy tribe. The bar was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses too big for their small hands. At a side of the bar, motorcycles which seemed to go off sporadically roared, but they also had mist surrounding them. I dispelled it and what I saw was an even weirder scene: goats with saddles beating sporadically. Which I realized were the previous roars from the motorcycles. Well, isn't that funny? I said aloud while looking at the goats, which almost reminded me of Amalthea the goat accompanying Thalia. I approached the bar, trying to appear nonchalant, and ordered a drink. The bartender, a Pygmy with a knowing smile, handed me a glass filled with a shimmering liquid. "What is a kid like you doing in a bar like this?" he asked in a voice that was deep and melodic. "I may be a kid, but I am at least taller than you," I said with a slight laugh. As soon as my words left my mouth, all the short men in the bar stopped their drinking and laughter, a slight red aura tinging them as they looked at me fiercely. "What did you say, kid?" the bartender asked me with a smile that didn't seem to be a happy one. "Nothing much, just the truth, but still, even if you are short, I can't deny your myths," I replied, trying to calm the tribe down before this ended in a bar fight. The bartender's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Ah, so you know of us, do you?" "I have been informed about you, yes," I replied as the other members of the tribe slowly approached me. "So you must know of our customs then. To receive our help, if you wish it, you must prove yourself worthy of it," the bartender said as the mischievous smile on his face spread from ear to ear. "Well, I guess I should do so," I replied, a small smile forming on my face as the tribesmen pulled out short weapons which were concealed in their clothing, and I summoned my spear from my tattoo while still being seated, looking at the bartender in front of me. Author note: would anyone be cool with me making a Patreon? No, then I guess I will show myself the door. Chapter 31, Fighting a 3,000-year-old tribe. Abidjan, Ivory Coast, December 2, 1999. Frieren, Beyond Genre's Ost Stark theme, Way of Warriors, epic version. You can put this to get in the mood. I think it is pretty cool. The tavern, previously silenced by my declaration of a challenge, rung out with yells as the tribesmen charged at me. Their diminutive forms hiding the ferocity and strength with which they fought, each standing no taller than 1.5 feet but with the strength of 5 full-grown men. I stood, my spear in hand, a smile creeping across my face despite the danger. This was the kind of challenge I lived for. As the first of the tribesmen lunged, I sidestepped, feeling the rush of air as his weapon missed its mark. The room was small, the air thick with the scent of ale and sweat, but it was an arena nonetheless. I parried another strike, the clack of wood on steel echoing as I blocked it with my pole. We were locked in a stalemate for a heartbeat before I kicked the small man, sending the tribesmen flying into the racks of bottles that lined the wall. Glass shattered, the scent of alcohol and other drinks filling the bar. "This is pretty fun," I couldn't help but say aloud, the grin on my face widening. The thrill of battle was intoxicating, and I reveled in it. The Pygmy were still relentless. As I fended off another attack, I caught sight of one of the tribesmen releasing the goats that had been bleeding in excitement at one side of the bar. The animals, at their sudden freedom, raged and charged at me as the tribesmen who released them seemed to speak a weird dialect, making them charge in my direction. I dodged a goat as it charged, using my spear to vault over another. The Pygmy used the distraction to their advantage, their attacks coming faster and more furious. I spun, my spear a blur, knocking aside their weapons, but there were too many. They were everywhere, a swarm of relentless fury. "You fight well, demigod," one of the tribesmen, the bartender, sneered, his voice high-pitched but laced with malice. "I've had practice," I shot back, knocking him aside with a sweep of my pole. The fight continued, neither side yielding. I was outnumbered but not outmatched. With each move, I continued developing my fighting style to counter the goats and small tribesmen who all launched themselves at me trying to defeat me. Then, as if by some unspoken signal, all the tribesmen leaped towards each other. They locked their arms and legs. Quickly they formed 4 figures as big as a normal man, which were made out of 8 tribesmen each. Their bodies began to glow, merging into a single form. When the light faded, a full-sized warrior stood before me, his eyes burning with the combined determination of the 8. "Will you fight like a man, little demigod?" the conjoined Pygmy said at the same time in an eerie manner while they let go of their short weapons, falling onto the wooden floor. "You wanna go? Then let's go," I replied to the 4 huge Pygmy as I unsummoned my spear, my Greek helmet tattoo appearing once again in my hand, while I quickly put my fists up for the brawl ahead. The 4 towering Pygmy warriors advanced, their movements synchronized and unervingly silent. I braced myself, the tattoo of my Greek helmet pulsing on my hand as if it sensed the impending struggle. The first to reach me swung a massive fist, which I narrowly avoided, feeling the whoosh of air as it passed. I countered with a swift jab to its liver, but it was like hitting stone. The creature didn't even flinch. A wide grin appeared on the conjoined Pygmy as it slammed its hand towards me, so I quickly backdashed. Yet before I could gather my footing, 2 of the other Pygmy launched themselves at me, throwing 1 punch from each of my sides. I raised my hands, blocking each of the strikes, a small boom resounding across the bar. "Godam!" I couldn't help but say as I waved my hands. With even more pressure, the 4th conjoined Pygmy rushed at me, sending a fast jab toward me. Before his jab could reach me, I raised my leg, kicking the Pygmy on his elbow, one of the conjoined Pygmy, a cracking sound echoing out as the Pygmy began to fall apart, after one of the Pygmy had been destroyed, the lock between the Pygmy. "1 down, 3 to go," I muttered as I saw the Pygmy from the conjoined figure laying on the floor unconscious. A sudden punch to my gut from one of the giant Pygmy hit me, sending me sprawling from the floor. I slowly stood up, but before K could gather myself, another hand slammed me into a wall. Okay, time to get serious," I said while huffing as the shadows all around the bar started gathering and going into me, infusing me with strength. Another punch from a conjoined Pygmy was launched at my face, but I raised my hand, catching the conjoined tribesman hand in my grip. It started trying to tug away from me, but I didn't let him. Before it could even react, I raised the being from his hand and slammed him into the bar floor. I then did an axe kick onto the fallen body. The Pygmy started falling out of the conjoined form, the 1.5-foot men laying unconscious. The final 2 giant Pygmy were even easier to defeat as I performed 2 quick jabs at their solar plexus, their forms falling apart. Once I had defeated the Pygmy, a small head popped out of behind the bar, green aura surrounding him. "Looks like you did pretty good," the bartender Pygmy said a little timidly. "Thanks. So can you guys gonna help me?" I questioned the bartender. "Sure, you have defeated us fair and square, so according to our customs we will try to help you," the bartender replied. "I need you to guide me to the Stymphalian flocks," I said seriously to the bartender Pygmy. "Seems simple enough, though we will have to fix this," the bartender replied, once again slowly eyeing the destroyed bar filled with the smell of alcohol and shattered bottles. "Oh, also I am Odysseus, son of Chiron," I introduced myself as I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you, Odysseus. I am Kozai, chief of the Pygmy tribe," Kozai replied as he shook my hand with a small grin on his face. Author note: Hey, I was wondering, would you guys / girls be cool with me putting small details about Greek mythos, like a word of the day type deal? Seems like it could be a cool thing to do, at least in my perspective. Chapter 32, Voyage with the Pygmy. Abidjan, December 3, 1999. So how exactly are we going to hunt these birds down? I asked Kozai, the chief of the Pygmy tribe, as I walked beside his goat. Simple enough, we already know where they will be, we just need to get there in time. Also, what is this we hunting the birds you are talking about? Our agreement was for our tribe to guide you, not fight with you. Kozai responded, turning to face me, though even on his goat he just barely reached my neck. Well, I thought since I beat you guys in the brawl you guys would help me. I replied to the chief, somewhat embarrassed as I scratched the back of my neck. Well, you thought wrong, we have our own monsters to fight. A Pygmy from the back yelled on top of his goat. Kozai nodded at the short tribesman words. Indeed, we need to fight the migratory cranes. Kozai explained. Then I guess I will stick with you guys until I reach the place where the Stymphalian birds will fly over. I couldn't help but sigh as the thought of going into battle with a tribe of goat riders against my newest labor vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Just wondering, but how far away exactly are we from the spot where the flock I am after will fly over? I couldn't help but ask Kozai. We aren't that far away, probably a month or two away on goatback. He replied as a matter of fact. 2 months. Can't we get there a bit faster? I whined slightly as I heard the chief's words. Sure, you could make it there before that, but it would make no sense as they would be in a different spot in time, so you will just be twiddling your thumbs until they fly over. Kozai replied, a grin forming on his face at the expense of myself. Days started turning into weeks as the small tribesmen, their goats, and I slowly traversed the African terrain little by little. Day 8. Come on, grip her horns, it isn't that hard. The voices around me yelled. Come on Odysseus, even newborns can do this. Another voice yelled from the sidelines. What do you guys think I am doing? I yelled back to the small men while infusing myself with shadows, strengthening my grip on the goat's horns, yet it continued jumping up and down, destroying my balls. It was honestly worse than when I rode the Trojan dragon. The bleating of the goats that seemed to cheer the goat I was riding to shake me off didn't also make my situation any better. Day 17. So Kozai, I was wondering. I asked the small man laying on the shady dunes at my side, why cranes? I mean, you guys could go after another animal, right? Don't know what to tell you, Odysseus, our tribe sees cranes and we have to hunt them, the same goes for them, it is almost a tradition at this point. Kozai answered while stretching his short limbs. That seems weird. I whispered to the silent night, not any weirder than what other tribes do, Elysium, hell, I would even say the gods are weirder than us. Kozai laughed aloud at his own words. He slowly rose up and said in a comforting tone, now come on demigod, we need to rest up for tomorrow. Yeah, I guess so. I replied as I followed him into a portable tent the tribe members had built up. Day 34. A small breath of victory was released from all the members of the Pygmy tribe as I also started to notice something in the sky in a darker shade of black than usual. Different lines traveled through the sky, intersecting among themselves at different points. We reached the land of birds, Molly. Kozai said with the same foolish grin as a child would have. Oh, that is cool, land of birds, but just wondering what the hell is even that? I said while pointing frantically at the different lines across the sky. Oh, you stupid demigod. Isn't it obvious those are the flight paths of different bird monsters that travel through here? Kozai said, his foolish grin widening even more. Yet I get that, what I mean is why can't I see them? I asked frustratedly at my little companion. Wait, you can see, since when can you see? Kozai said, a fake dramatic gasp escaping his mouth. I rolled my head at his antics, which I had slowly grown used to. I can see. No, please explain those lines across the sky. Oh, those are just formed by a slight modification of the mist made by Hecate. Hecate, goats of the mist, magic, and crossroads, pretty useful for times like these. Kozai replied. Day 45. After some more teasing of my ignorance by the tribesmen, we started following a mist road, as they called it. As you could probably guess, it was the mist road for the Stymphalian birds. We finally reached a place where the mist road seemed to conglomerate into a spot and then continue forward. While I was looking at the dark spot in the sky, the voice of one of my companions broke me out of my stupor. Well, I guess here is where we part ways. Kozai's voice permeated through the dry air like a knife through butter. Hey! I couldn't help but say at the suddenness of his words. Yeah, this is the place where the Stymphalian birds will fly over, and also the place where we part ways. Kozai said, a sad smile appearing on his face. Well then, small man, I thank you for your service. I said quickly, trying to change the bad mood which had fallen over us and the rest of the tribe. I hope we meet again. I continued. If the fates permit it, Odysseus. Kose, I said as he clasped my hand in a final goodbye. I then said goodbye to the rest of the tribe members and the extra goat which had brought me here. Bessie, I know best name for a goat. Then they slowly began to ride to another mist road, probably to go fight the migrating cranes, but I decided to stop thinking about that. I had my own fight ahead, and if Heracles' labor was anything to go by, it wasn't going to be easy. Greek mythos fact: in the Iliad, Achilles wasn't invulnerable to attacks. He in fact had a magic armor which enhanced his strength and couldn't be pierced. He lent this armor to his brother in arms, also his gay lover, Patroclus, and when he was slain by Hector, Hector stole the armor. In the end, with the help of his mother, Thetis, Achilles convinces Hephaestus to forge a new magic armor and a shield for his battle with Hector, Prince of Troy. The myth of him being bathed in the river Styx was written by Statius in the Achilliad, where we learn that he was bathed by his mother in the river, hanging by his heel, making him invulnerable except for that part. Chapter 33, The Early Bird Gets the Demigod. 1 month later. Mali, Land of Birds, February 18, 2000. I yawned as I left my makeup tent, which I had built at the spot where Kose and his tribesmen had said the Stymphalian birds would fly over. It had been almost a month since I had arrived here, and I had seen no heads or tails of the man-eating birds. Honestly, the only thing that kept me from being bored were the almost daily rainbow calls I received from either Thalia or my dad. Speaking of, I couldn't help but think as a rainbow of mist started forming in front of me and 4 figures appeared: 2 girls, a boy, and a beautiful goat. At least that is what she bleated. Hey Odysseus! The smallest of the girls, Annabeth, who had joined Thalia's group a few weeks, said excitedly as she saw me. She always seemed excited when it came to Iris messages. Hello Annabeth. I replied to the excited you girl, who was actually only 2 years younger than me. No birds yet? Thalia asked, probably noticing my slightly fallen expression. No sight of them. I sighed at her words. Don't worry dude, I am sure you will spot them sooner or later. Luke said concisely, the boy who had previously annoyed me from his aura alone slowly growing on me, though something about him still felt slightly off. Our conversation continued on, talking about frivolous things like what we had for dinner yesterday or how fucking cold the dessert got at night. After an hour I decided to end the call, since Iris was probably stressing herself out keeping our message up for so long. As the hours went by, I continued doing my usual routine, basically eating Pringles cans in my tent while reading some books I had grabbed before I had left from camp. Then at the edge of my sight I caught onto something: huge birds with a wingspan spanning 4 meters, sharp claws and beaks. I smiled at their approach and whispered at myself, finally. I quickly left my tent, the tent then submerging into my shadow with everything inside it as well. I sunk my hands inside my shadow, grabbing 2 items. Slowly I retrieved them, my bow and my quiver filled with arrows. Let's do this, I said in excitement as I strapped my quiver to my back while the impending flock approached. I grabbed an arrow from my quiver and knocked it on my bow. I streamed, drawing my bowstring slowly but surely while the flock approached. I reached full draw, and with a final breath I angled my bow and released the arrow. Whoosh! The arrow sliced through the air, a silent harbinger of death for the Stymphalian birds. The first bird fell, yet before it crashed into Thess' sandy floor it evaporated into thin air, going back into Tartarus, a weird cracking sound echoing through my being. The flock at the sudden death of one of its brethren squawked in anger and confusion. Before they could attack me I knocked another arrow, it sliced through the air hitting another giant bird, again the same cracking echoed throughout my body. The birds flapped their wings at me, a hurricane of metallic feathers falling from the sky. I quickly summoned my shadow tendrils from my own shadow, blocking the metallic feathers aiming to kill me. I knocked another arrow and let it fly, another bird fell, once again the cracking sound rung. The battle raged on. I continued shooting down birds with my arrows, each time a cracking sound even louder echoing through my body, while I blocked their range attacks with the help of my tendrils and my hoodie, which lit up to defend me when the feathers were able to overcome my tendrils. The sound of breaking chains reverberated across my body as the 6th bird fell, its metallic feathers clattering to the ground, before disintegrating. In a moment of shock and confusion, my tendrils began to transform before my very eyes, shifting and twisting into unfamiliar shapes. But there was no time for wonder as another barrage of razor-sharp feathers rained down upon me. With newfound instinct, I raised one of my tendrils, except it wasn't a tendril, it was a shield construct made from my own shadow to protect myself. Something remarkable happened. My tendrils seemed to have evolved in this chaotic battle. At this new power I couldn't help but think of the Caledonian boar and the power I seemed to have developed in the midst of battle against it. This is awesome! I couldn't help but say as I said aloud. I started fidgeting with my newest powers in the distance of battle. They seemed to respond to my thoughts and desires, shifting and transforming at will. When I needed defense, they became impenetrable shields. When I wanted to attack, they morphed into deadly spears with sharpened tips. With a surge of determination, I commanded my shadows to attack independently for the first time ever. Without being tethered to my own body, shadow, they soared through the air, piercing through multiple Stymphalian birds with ease. A sense of exhilaration overtook me as I realized the full extent of my newest power. "You're cooked," I said with a wolfish grin as I saw with the ease with which my newly unlocked power killed these mythical beings. The remaining members of the flock squalled at me in fury and resignation, but I just knocked an arrow onto my bow as I thought of spears forming from my shadow. Then I released my arrows and at the same time the shadowy giant spears flew from my sides impaling the giant birds. I continued my barrage of arrows and shadow spears at the birds, slowly dwindling their numbers until only one was left. With a final grieving squawk the bird sent its metallic feathers at me as I let an arrow fly from my bow. My arrow flew true, piercing the moving bird's eye. Just as I was about to celebrate my victory I felt a cold, metallic feeling pass through my cheek. I slowly lifted my hand up to my cheek, and touched it. While I couldn't see the color of blood, I could still feel the slice on my cheek and the block of darker liquid on my hand. "Okay Odysseus, that was close," I huffed. As the final bird evaporated into the air, a drowsy feeling I had felt 2 times before started overcoming me, my eyes started closing and soon I fell unconscious onto the sandy ground. Odysseus dreamscape, time uncown. "Hello once again son." My godly parent Erebus spoke as the usual hundreds of eyes around vibrated slightly at his primordial voice. "Yeah, hi father, let's get down to business. What is my next labor?" I asked one of the bigger eyes around me. "Well, I would have liked to talk more to you, but if that is what you want." My father's voice rung out once again. "For your third labor you will need to capture the Serenian hind, a sacred deer of Artemis that can outrun an arrow. Your newest labor is based on a hunt of Actaeon." My father's voice reverberated across the infinite space. The dude who was turned into a deer by Artemis for peeping on her accidentally while she was bathing and was then eaten by his own wolves. I asked my father since I was starting to see a pattern on my labors. "The very same." Erebus replied. "Okay, could you answer one of my questions? Are my labors just going to be repeats of labors previously done by students of Chiron?" I asked my godly parent. "Wait. No, you are definitely just reading way too much into it." My father spluttered. I looked at one of the bigger eyes suspiciously. "Don't think about it too much. Now onto your hint. You will find Artemis sacred deer in a European region where the red deer is located," my father said in a quick manner as if he were trying to change the subject from before. "Okay, the hints you are giving me are getting worse every time. Like with the Caledonian boar I at least had a concrete clue of where it was, but the red deer is almost in every region of Europe. That isn't helpful." I whined slightly at my godly parent. "I can't give you any more clues, that is the most I can do for you," my father replied as I sunk into the shadowy floor, like I had a few times before. Molly Land of Birds, February 18, 2000. My eyes sprung open from my newest talk with my godly father. "Okay Odysseus, let's think for a second," I said aloud as I started searching into my small amount of knowledge on Greek stories. I started pacing back and forth recalling every story about Artemis and her sacred deers. According to the most probable story, the Serenian hind was one of the 5 huge deers with golden antlers and bronze hooves, given to Artemis by the nymph Theogony, given to her because Artemis saved the nymph from the pursuit of Zeus. That isn't much help, I thought, moving on to the next story. Not much is known from Actaeon's hunt, but in Heracles' labor it is said that the hunt begun in Eno, then to Mount Artemisium in Argolis, and thence to the river Loddon in Arcadia, where in its exhaustion Heracles was finally able to capture it. Let's see, Eno was a small island located in the northwest, so in Europe what would be an island in the northwest which also has red deer? I said aloud. England, I exclaimed as the realization came to me. Okay, on to the next part. Mount Artemisium in Argolis was a place almost in the middle of Greece with a temple of Artemis at its summit. In Europe, a place in the center that has a lot of wildlife and therefore a place where Artemis would be welcomed would be France. It has a lot of wildlife when it comes to wolves and is almost at the center, I concluded. On to the final part of the story, the Loddon River in Arcadia. It was said to be located at the top of the mountain tops and slowly went down a slope into an eastern sea. A place in Europe located at the south with mountains and rivers that leads into the Mediterranean is the Pyrenees in Spain, I said, a huge grin forming on my face as I finished my conclusion. Okay, then that means I will have 3 main places to look through: England, France and Spain. Let's do this, I finished saying as I started following the mist road back to Abidjan. Greek mythos fact: today's fact is the two beginnings of the universe to show how different information of the same pantheon can be. Theogony, in this story the beginning of the world started from nothingness, from that nothingness Khaos was born and from it 5 primordials were born: Gaia, Earth, Eros, Attraction, Tartarus, Nyx, Night, Erebus, Darkness. Kronos, Sky, is a son of Gaia who is equal to her. Orphic traditions: from nothingness 2 beings were born: Hydros, Water, and Gaia, Earth. From them 2 more primordials were born: Ananke, Compulsion/necessity, and Kronos, Time. These 2 beings, who were both represented as winged serpents, crushed the primal egg of creation, dividing the universe into heaven, earth, and sea. Ananke's and Kronos' offspring are Khaos, Chaos, Aether, Ether, and Fans, creation. If you guys want to know more about this, like offspring of certain primordials, definitely ask any questions you have in their respective beginnings of the universe XD. Chapter 34, A Greek Demigod Family. 1 month later. England, London, March 18, 2000. With the mist concealing my form, I slowly made my way across the London airport. Honestly, each time I thought of the mist I couldn't help but think how effective it was against mortals, since I used almost all the time. I couldn't help but wonder how difficult my quest would have been until now if I hadn't had the help of the mist. I made it to honestly the most difficult part of sneaking through airport security. I kept close to an old man going in front of me. The man took off all his metal possessions and placed them in a basket. While still keeping myself invisible to the mortal eye, the old man started passing through the security machine while I walked closely behind him. The machine suddenly went off, but I paid it no mind as the old man sadly was stopped by airport security and they took that metal detector wand, started inspecting the old man. Yeah, when that machines go off for no reason, it is just a demigod who sneaked with you. I finally left the airport and dispelled the mist around me. Calling one of the cabs that always were waiting at the airport, the cab drove to me and I opened the back right door. "Hello, mister," I said at my taxi driver. Hello kid, not that I mean to be rude, but do you have money?" The driver's shadowy form asked me with a questioning look, the orange aura around him intensifying. "Yes," I replied as I took out $1 bills from my pocket and started using the mist to change them into 20-pound bills so as to not arouse too much suspicion. "Okay then, so where to?" the cab driver said at the sight of my mist money. "Could you take me to the best hotel you know? I am slightly tired of the flight," I said to my cab driver. "It is a little far from here, are you sure?" the cab driver questioned. "Yeah, I am sure," I replied. After a few minutes of silent driving, the cab driver asked me while keeping his eyes on the road, "So what is a kid like you doing here in London?" "I am here on a personal vacation," I replied to the driver, almost laughing at the thought of thinking of my quest as a vacation. "Well, okay then," the driver said somewhat awkwardly as the cab was again engulfed by silence. The driver continued driving the cab as he turned on the English radio, probably to slightly fix the awkward silence. "So any ideas what you are going to do for this vacation of yours?" the cab driver asked. "Yeah, I have a few. We'll probably go to Scotland, there is something I want to find there," I replied to the driver. "Ah, Scotland, lots of wonderful forests," the driver replied. The drive went on, but suddenly without warning I felt a huge amount of mist being located at one place, almost as if it were being controlled. With a slight amount of intrigue, I then said to the driver, "Could you please not take me to a hotel? I have a location in mind." "Sure, lad, just say it and we will head there," the driver replied. I closed my eyes as I sensed the huge amount of mist. It seemed to be a few kilometers east from where we were heading. "Yeah, just head east. I will tell you when we got there," I said to my cab driver. "Okay, east we go," he replied as he started spinning his wheel. If you were wondering as to why he wasn't questioning my blindness, I had used the mist to change my eyes from white pupils to brown, since I found out in the beginning of my quest some people were creeped out by a blind kid knowing exactly where he was going. The drive went on. I slowly guided the driver east, south, right, left, straight. Finally, after 20 more minutes of driving, since I sensed the giant mass of mist, I reached the place the mist was coming from him. "Here," I said to my driver as he turned on his signals to let the other cars know he was stopping, and said, "Well lad, here we are. I hope this is the place you wanted." "Thanks, now what do I have to pay you?" I asked the man. £112.30, but I will take it down to £110. The driver said with an awkward smile on his face, probably from charging so much to a child. I took out 3 $1 bills and changed what they looked like, in my hand 2 50-pound and 1 10-pound bill appeared. "Here you go," I said to the driver as I handed him the missed money and left the cab. While I did feel slightly bad from scamming him, hey, a demigod has to do what he has to do. I stood in front of a huge housing development which sat right on the bank of the River Thames. The mist was coming from one of the flats in the housing development. I walked to the door of the housing development, summoning one of my tendrils. I brought it to the lock on the doorway, and with my newest power I started shaping the tendril until I heard the click of the pins on the lock being unlocked. I turned the shadow key and opened the door. I summoned my spear as I walked into the housing development, since while I could sense where the mist was coming from, my sight couldn't seem to peek into the flat as if something were blocking it, so I would rather be safe than sorry. I walked up the building stairs, making my way to the door where all the concentrated mist was coming from. I used the same trick from my tendrils as I had used before. Again I heard the click of the pins, and so I turned the pommel on the door. The door opened, spear in hand. Finally my sight could see what was inside of the flat, and I saw something weirder than giants, small tribesmen, dragons, dragons, giant ants, immortal hunters. It was a family of 6, 2 old people who I thought almost nothing of, and 4 others, a man, a woman, a young boy and a female toddler. The weird part was that the mist swirled around all of them. They were demigods. Greek mythos fact. Today's fact, since I saw that a lot of people didn't seem to know about Orphic traditions or Orpheism, is going to be death and afterlife. Orphic beliefs differed from mainstream Greek religion in a number of key ways. One difference between the two was Orphic religion's focus on the god Dionysus, known to Orphics as Zagreus. Orphic religion put Zagreus at the center of the conflict between the Titans and the gods. According to Orphic belief, Zagreus's body was consumed by the Titans. When Zeus destroyed the Titans, the resulting ash, from which mankind was born, contained parts of both Zagreus and the Titans who consumed him. According to Orphic thought, a human soul contained 2 parts, one originating from Zagreus, and another from the Titans. The Zagreus-originated soul was called the soul of man, and represented that part of the human spirit that was divine. The Titan-originated soul, meanwhile, kept the other part, the divine, in bondage. When it came to death, Orphics believed in reincarnation. Each soul went through 10 cycles of death and rebirth, bound to earthly bodies by their Titan-originated souls. This process was called metempsychosis, or the transmigration of the soul, and was a crucial part of Orphic belief. Orphics also believed that there were various instructions that a dead soul should adhere to when they arrived in the underworld. These rites would grant their practitioners certain benefits in the afterlife. Ancient tablets indicate that Orphics believed that the dead should not drink from the pool of Lethe, or forgetfulness, but drink instead from the pool of mnemosyne, or memory. It was also said that the dead should offer themselves up to Persephone with the blessing of Zagreus, or the Bacchic one. Chapter 35, Egyptian not Greek. London, England, 18th of March 2000. The sight of what looked like a full demigod family was weird to say the least. The man, who seemed to be around 30 years old, said to the other family members, "Ruby, take care of the kids, I will take care of this." As he finished speaking, a staff suddenly materialized in his right hand. My eyes widened at the sudden ability the man had displayed. I deftly unsummoned my spear, my Greek helmet tattoo appearing once again. "I mean no harm," I quickly said as I raised my arms into the air. The woman who the man had called Ruby, her arms extended downwards protecting the 2 children, who seemed to be between 4 and 3 respectively, asked in a clear manner, "What gnome do you belong to?" "Gnome, as in the little dwarf-like creatures," I replied while titling my head slightly to the side. "Stop playing games, why are you in our home?" the man asked defensively, staff still raised at me. I felt a ton of mist being concentrated here, so I decided to check it out. I answered the bald man with a sharp goatee. "Mist?" the little boy, who appeared to be 4 years old, questioned behind the body of his mother. "Yeah, mist, you know, the thing that keeps mortals from seeing monsters in us," I replied to the boy's query, a little weirded out as to why the parents hadn't told their children about themselves. "Do you mean the do-it?" Ruby asked me. "Do-it, what the hell is that?" I questioned the mother. "Yeah, the veil that keeps mortals and us separated," Ruby replied. "Stop answering his questions, Ruby, he entered our home," the man said, still looking at me with a protectiveness only a real father could have. "Oh come on, Julius, he is just a child, how much harm could he cause?" Ruby talked to her husband, whose name I now knew was Julius. "I told you this would happen eventually, sorcery and gods, you shouldn't have gone into that world." The grandma suddenly interjected into our conversations, berating the other 2 adults. "Mother, relax, everything will be fine." Ruby said, trying to calm her mother down. Grab the children and go into the kitchen, we need to talk with our guest for now. Ruby continued as the grandmother grabbed the two children hidden behind Ruby and with the grandfather left the living room. Okay, now could you please introduce yourself? Ruby said as she placed her hand on her husband's shoulder, lowering his staff which was still aimed at me. Sure, I am Odysseus, son of Chiron. And you are? I asked while introducing myself. We are Julius and Ruby Kane, sorcerers of the life gnome. Ruby replied with a small smile on her face. We then both sat down at different sides, Ruby and Julius sitting on the sofa while I sat on a reclining chair, in front of them at Ruby's pandering. So what is a child like yourself doing all alone? Julius questioned me. I am on a quest sent by the gods. I replied to the man who oddly reminded me of my own dad, Chiron. A quest by the gods. Julius once again questioned me with a look that said he didn't believe me. Yeah, you know the gods Apollo, Artemis, Ares. I said, trying to ease the man's worries. Oh, you're Greek? Ruby said with an excited look on her face. Hey, obviously you are too. I said, a little weirded out of them pointing out the obvious. Pfft, no, we aren't Odysseus, we are Egyptian. Ruby said, slightly laughing at my response. What Egyptian? I said with a dumbfounded look. Yet as in before she could finish speaking, Julius interrupted as he said, Ruby, we shouldn't tell him. Oh come on Julius, we know he is Greek, the least we could do is tell him about us. Ruby replied, a small smile forming on her face. Fine. Julius finished saying as he crossed his arms and sunk into the sofa. We. Ruby said as she placed her hand on both herself and Julius, are Egyptian magicians, just like the Greek pantheon exists for you, the Egyptian pantheon exists for us. Wait, then does that mean that all other pantheons exist too? I asked as thought, an awful thought started appearing in my mind. We know of a few others, so the best answer we can give you is kinda. Julius said. Our conversation continued, discussing various topics about their own respective worlds, from the gnomes' bases of sorceries to Camp Half-Blood, but all the time we stayed away from things like specific locations and such. So why haven't you told your children? I am just wondering. I asked the parents seated in front of me. We thought it was too soon, besides they are still young, we want them to enjoy themselves and not have these worries. Julius said for the first in an endearing tone in our conversation. I guess I get that. I said with slightly envious, as the thought of living a normal life had never crossed my mind before. Well, I know now why there is such a concentrated amount of mist here, so I guess I will be leaving. I said as I stood up from the reclining chair. Why don't you stay with us for dinner? You need to rest from your flight, right? Ruby said with a small smile on her face. I don't want to intrude. I replied. You aren't intruding. Ruby said, the smile never leaving her face. Oh yes, he is. An old voice came from the kitchen. Be quiet, Ma, Ruby yelled at the kitchen. Then I would be happy to stay for dinner. I said while scratching my cheek, a little awkward from the shouts. Greek mythos fact. Today's fact will be kind of an intertwining fact between the Greek and Egyptian myths. When Typhon, son of Gaia and Tartarus, husband of Echidna, mother of monsters, attacked Olympus, Typhon was so powerful that the Greek Olympians fled to Egypt while taking on the form of animals. This is the explanation the Greeks give about the different gods: Artemis Bast, Hermes Thoth, Zeus Ammon. In the end, Zeus goes back to Greece to fight Typhon and almost kills him, but has his tendons ripped out of him and is tossed into a cave. Hermes and Pan grab Zeus' tendons, sneak into the cave and basically jumble him back into tip-top shape. Don't ask me how, I have no clue myself. Zeus goes back to fighting Typhon, and when Typhon is fleeing, Zeus drops a mountain on him. This happens a lot in myth stories. This leads to the formation of Mount Etna. This volcano actually exists and it is super active. Asterisk author note: I was thinking of doing a patron, but like for real cease, this patron would have 10 chaps ahead in this story plus a side fanfic which I will publish chapters for when I have the time. Don't know how many of you will spend money on it, but hey, it's worth a shot XD. Also, we made it to 29th in popularity, so let's go everyone, THX for your support. Asterisk. Chapter 36, Eating with Sorcerers. Faust Residence, 18th of March 2000. Now come on Mom, take the kids to the living room, let me cook dinner for today. Ruby said as she slowly led her mother, father, Sadie, and Carter to the living room. Just be careful, and don't use the leftmost frying pan. Ms. Faust yelled from the living room as Ruby swiftly closed the kitchen door behind them. Well, that is one problem gone. Ruby said, lightly smiling. So what should we make? I asked Ruby while Julius was eyeing me, his back resting on a kitchen wall. Oh, don't worry about that, just sit and talk with Julius. She reassured as she pointed at a long table with 8 chairs surrounding it. Are you sure? I asked, feeling slightly awkward at having her do the dinner solely by herself. Yeah, I'm sure, I just didn't want you to be with my mother. She doesn't necessarily like our world, and by extension yourself, she has a slightly different worldview from us. She added. Okay. I replied, still feeling slightly bad as I saw her turn on the ceramic stove and grabbed a pan. I turned to Julius, he just turned to face me, his mouth shut. So Julius, have you faced any monsters recently? I asked the man awkwardly as the orange aura around him flared slightly. Is that you trying small talk? He questioned me, arms crossed. Hey, I am trying here, I don't exactly know much about your society aside from your gnomes. I remarked. Fine, the monsters I mostly recently killed was a pack of serpopards. He relented, probably trying to get the conversation, which I honestly appreciated since while I was alone I didn't mind silence. When I was with people, staying silent just felt awkward. Serpopards, what are those? I asked, intrigued by a group of monsters which didn't belong to my pantheon. Serpopards are half serpent and half leopard, they have the body of a leopard and the neck and head of a serpent, their necks are elongated and scaly and they possess a forked tongue. Julius explained. I turned my staff into a giant snake and had it gobble up the monsters. Julius continued, an adventurous grin forming on his face as he seemed to be recalling the fight. What about you, kiddo? What is the most recent monster that you have killed? Julius asked me. The most recent monster I killed was a group of Amphisbania. Were huge Saharan snakes with 2 heads at each end that were able to spit 2 strings of venom, kind of like king cobras. As for how I killed them, I used this. I explained as tendrils started appearing from my shadow, and I also summoned my spear, wanting to look cool. That is cool. Julius said, intrigued by my sudden display of my powers. How do you use them? He questioned me, his curiosity leaking out of him. Oh, I summon my spear from my tattoo. I replied as I unsummoned my spear, a tattoo of a Greek helmet appearing on my hand as I showed him. While my shadow and dark tendrils, I don't know, it is more like a will thing. I tell them what to do and they normally do it. I continued. That seems pretty easy to use, but is that all? He asked me. I mean, yeah, I can do a few other things, but they all have to do with either shadows or darkness. I replied Julius' question. Looks like you demigods are very restrained by your parentage. He deduced. Yeah, of course that is the origin of our power, but I wouldn't say I am restrained. Like, what can you do? I questioned Julius. The conversation went on as we both kept comparing the different powers each of us could use, and the conversation started flowing smoothly the more we conversed. Ruby worked diligently in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans mixing with the sizzle of food as she prepared a feast. The aroma of roasted vegetables and seasoned meat filled the air, signaling that dinner was almost ready. With a satisfied nod at the golden brown chicken resting on the counter, she called out, "Dinner's ready." MS and Mr. Faust entered the kitchen with Carter and Sadie, as they heard Ruby's voice. Julius and I started setting the table and plates for everyone. I sat across from Julius, Ruby at his side, Carter and Sadie at my left, while MR and MRS Faust sat at the edge of the table. We started indulging in the chicken and I couldn't help but exclaim, "Ruby, this is amazing, it is as good as Camp Half-Bloods, and that is literally made by nymphs and magic, so I tip my hat to you." "Well, thank you, Odysseus," she replied with a small smile on her face. Of course, her food would be better than anything made by magic. MRS Faust spit out. "Mom, please not at the table," Ruby said. The dinner continued with slight chatter crossing the table, MRS and Mr. Faust talking about UK politics, the Queen, etc. I on the other hand couldn't help but look at Carter and Sadie Kane, the 4-year-old boy and 3-year-old girl. Carter was helping her sister eat the chicken, and I couldn't help but think of how sweet it all looked, and if this is what I looked like to the Aphrodite cabin kids when I was young. Finally we finished eating the food, with a flan dessert at the end, which was also delicious by the way. After that everyone made their ways to their respective rooms, while Julius, who after our monster conversation I had slowly grown on, took out the bed from under the coach and I slept in that, my consciousness thinking of the amazing family this was, except maybe for MRS Faust. Odysseus Dreamscape, Time Uncanmoon. Enjoying yourself? My godly Fater's voice reverberated across the infinite space as millions of eyes opened. "Oh, what now, father?" I asked at seeing I had once again been brought here. "You shouldn't stay with them for long. Normally I can't talk to you, but this is important. While you can know of other pantheons' existence, staying too long with people from other pantheons can lead to undesired consequences. Erebus' voice again strung across the space. Okay, I will leave them quickly, but tell me one thing that has been bugging me for a while. If all pantheons exist, then what happens when a beginning of the world starts? Does that mean we are all royally screwed? I questioned the biggest eye. No, don't worry about that. If a pantheon fails and the world is destroyed, that doesn't mean it will be the same to you or mortals. My father explained. Now that I have answered your question, you need to leave the Kane family, understood? My father continued. Still don't understand why, but sure, I will trust you. I will leave tomorrow. I replied to my father. Good, now leave and get some sleep. Erebus finished saying as I sunk into the dark floor and the space around me shattered. Greek mythos fact: the Caledonians are magical, singing automatons crafted of gold by the divine smith Hephaestus, for the second temple of Apollon at Delphi. The Caledonians had the form of either beautiful women, wry-neck birds, or a combination of the two siren-like bird women. They are similar to the Kure Kriza, the golden attendants of Hephaestus on Olympus. Author note: I really need power stones, so if you guys could send them I will appreciate it a lot. Chapter 37, Egyptian and Greek do not mix. Faust Residence, March 19, 2000. Well, thank you for your hospitality everyone, but I really should be going. I explained to the Kane family as we sat finishing breakfast. Okay then, don't let the door hit you on your way out. Miss Faust said, a wide grin appearing on her face. I probably hadn't won her over, I couldn't help but think. I bid my goodbyes to the family, while tickling the children with my shadowy tendrils. Odysseus, I have something for you. Ruby said as a compass materials in her hand, which she probably summoned from the do-it-an ability they had explained to me, which seemed pretty similar to my shadow inventory. What is this? I asked as I grabbed the compass she handed over to me, inspecting it with my vision and missed seeing different inscriptions upon its sides, which I recognized as hieroglyphs, but I obviously couldn't read. It is a compass that will lead you to the thing that you want. She explained in a matter-of-fact manner as if this was a run-of-the-mill artifact. Wait, what? That's amazing! I exclaimed, my blank pupils dilating in excitement at her words. Well, there are some conditions for it, like if what you are looking for is in a barrier, then it won't be able to locate it and just go haywire and things of similar nature. She explained. That is still amazing. I couldn't help but add, are you sure I can keep this? Don't worry kid, she has like 9 more in the do-it for personal use. Julius answered. A backup for a backup, I always say. Ruby replied in a righteous manner. Now, be careful on your journey. They both continued as I finally bid my goodbye to both of them and left the building. I finally left the apartment building completely, grabbed the compass and started thinking of the Serenian Hind. The compass started spinning wildly for a few seconds. When it finally stopped, I could see it was pointing north and slightly west. I started heading into a nearby subway, but just as I reached the stairs I felt something weird and then my sight caught onto it. At the back end of the subway station, flying at me at an alarming speed, was a 6-feet-long cobra, with a human face and white eyes with a crown on her head. Sorcerer! The cobra hissed as she flew at me. I barrel rolled out of the way, the cobra speeding past me. I am not a sorcerer! I yelled back at the flying cobra, which now started coming back towards me. I summoned my spear and shadow tendrils. I stretched out my hand, which I wasn't holding my spear with, and my tendrils followed my commands, coiling around the cobra, restraining it. Follower of Apophis! The cobra hissed as it saw itself trapped by my shadows. With a blinding display of light, the cobra started growing, breaking free from my tendrils, the red aura around her intensifying. Just who the hell are you? I couldn't help but grunt at seeing this wasn't going to be such a simple fight. The cobra once again flapped its wings, rushing at me. I decided to change tactics and waited until the cobra was closer, then I used my spear and vaulted with it onto the cobra's back. From there I quickly sunk my spear into its body in a similar manner as I had with the Trojan dragons. Roar! A roar of pain escaped the cobra's mouth as it yelled in pain, as Wajet, god of cobras, I summon you. With its cry, the lamppost, signals, cars, started changing their form as they transformed into scaly cobras, all with huge red auras surrounding them. This isn't going to be fun, I said as I retracted my spear quickly and formed a shield with my spear before a cobra car hit me. I then pivoted on my back foot and stabbed the cobra car, which had lunged at me, straight through its jaw, the cobra once again returning to the form of a BMW, just with a huge puncture across it. Sorry about that, whoever it belonged to, I thought as I saw the damaged car. The transformed cobras started surrounding me as they lunged at me. I converted my tendrils into spears and quickly shot them at the giant cobras, defeating a few. Meanwhile the winged cobra which I knew was Wadjet just stayed in the sky eyeing me like a predator would his prey. "Come on you leather boots, come at me!" I yelled as I battled the giant cobra's adrenaline and the rush of battle providing me with an excitement which could only be felt here. Deciding I needed to try and finish this as quickly as possible, I decided to do one of my dad, Chiron, favorite moves. I controlled a few tendrils to go into me, giving me a strength no other demigod could have, then I decided to execute my father's move. I purposefully lunged exclusively at one of the incoming transformed cobras, giving myself an opening so that Wadjet could take it, and like a moth like a flame he fell right for it. At seeing my excessive lunge with my spear, it dived towards me from behind full speed, but I was prepared. After all, it was part of my plan. I used the momentum from my lunge and spun, finally when I was parallel to the flying Egyptian goddess, and before it could react, I threw my spear with all my strength. It whistled through the air. Wadjet tried avoiding the attack by flying upwards, but that just made it worse as my spear went straight through the god's head. Blood started spitting from it, and its giant scaly body fell to the ground. "Why the hell were you after me?" I decided to ask Wadjet, as I saw it was still alive. "You are a member of Apophis, you use shadows, I senses your connection to darkness a few hours ago," Wadjet said, breathing heavily as the Queen of Cobras spat blood. "As protector of Lower Egypt, it is my job to snuff out members of Apophis," Wadjet continued. "I am Greek," I yelled at the dying Egyptian goddess. "Hey!" As the realization struck the goddess in her last moments, subtle laugh escaped her jaws, as she dissipated into thin air. I stood there looking at the place where a goddess previously stood. "Okay, when your godly parent says to leave as soon as possible, next time you leave as soon as you finish talking to him," I noted to myself. Still, does that mean that if you meet people from other pantheons that you also subject yourself to the monsters from those pantheons? I mean, that seems like it is what happened here. I started thinking on what all this meant and how the different pantheons interacted with one another in the mortal and divine worlds. Egyptian mythos fact: gonna give some context to poor Wadjet, she didn't deserve Odysseus' spear. Wait, that sounds wrong. Wadjet was one of the earliest Egyptian deities. She began to be worshipped in the pre-dynastic period as the tutelary goddess of Lower Egypt, the northern part of the country. She eventually became the official goddess of the monarchy, when Lower Egypt fused with Upper Egypt c. 3500 BC. Wadjet's job was to guard the kings of Egypt and to protect them from their enemies. Chapter 38, Compass leads the way. 2 weeks later. Scotland, April 3, 2000. I checked the compass once again, it was still pointing north. As I read the sign, tough my vision did let me read it was a little hard since it was just a darker or lighter shade of black. The sign, read Galloway Forest Park. I finally thought I was getting closer as the compass's needle, which before stayed resting I1 position, started moving slightly from east to west, meaning that the deer was moving. Gotcha, I said aloud as I ran into the forest, wanting to be done with this quest as soon as possible. USA, April 3, 2000. Thalia POV. Annabeth, Luke, and I stood before a rundown house which looked as if it were about to fall apart at any moment, a horrid smell coming out of it, something our demigod senses didn't seem to like if the looks on Annabeth and Luke's faces were anything to go by. I swore never to come back here. Luke sighed as he got closer to the door and knocked on it. Soon a raspy voice yelled from inside the house, "Luke, Luke." A woman with straw-like grey hair sticking upwards, grey lifeless eyes and a maniac smile opened the door. "Luke, you are back," the woman yelled as her maniac smile stretched even further from ear to ear at the sight of Luke. "We need to go in," Luke replied coldly as a piercing pain escaped from my side as the wound I had been given spurted even more blood, staining my orange shirt even further. Annabeth helped me stay up, as Luke walked into the house while leading both of us carefully. If the woman who had greeted us weren't weird enough, inside the house stacks of peanut butter sandwich jars, all of them spoiled and rotting, burnt cookies displayed on trays and boxes of Kool-Aid lay sprawled on the ground, shelves and walls. It was a hoarding like nothing I had ever seen. "Come on Thalia, lay here." Luke guided me to a sofa which he cleaned in a quick manner which allowed me to lay down. MRS? Could you please leave us alone for a while?" Annabeth, our newest addition, said in a polite manner, probably seeing that the woman was putting Luke on edge. "Of course, you are Luke's friends, I will go make some cookies and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches," she exclaimed frantically as he noticed a picture of a man hanging on her arm by 2 lines of scotch tape. "Well, your mom is something," I couldn't help but say to Luke as the mad look in the woman's eyes reminded me of when my own mother went crazy after being abandoned by my father. "You can say that again," Luke replied. "I am gonna go to the bathroom, see if there are any bandages in this place," he continued, as he started walking through the pile of jars and burnt cookies. Doesn't it seem like he is more distant? Annabeth, the cute 7-year-old which had joined us, asked me as she looked at the direction in which Luke left. A small smile formed on my face as I saw how worried she was over him, not that I wasn't, but it did remind me of a certain someone. He probably does feel distant. Imagine this is what you left and what you come back to. I replied to Annabeth's query, since I could sympathize with him because my circumstances were almost the same as his, just that I was able to reach camp on my first year after I ran away while Luke hadn't. My words didn't seem to lessen her worries as she still looked with her characteristic puppy dog eyes. Come on Annabeth, try to take your mind off it and help me take my jacket off, I said to the little girl. She ran over to me and helped me sit up. Slowly she took off my leather jacket, something which felt weird not having on. After that we rolled up my camp shirt, revealing the wound which had been done by a dragon which we had encountered after the haunted mansion. It was a long semi-shallow cut that stretched from my hip up to my ribcage. I had applied nectar as first aid after the battle, but a small amount of blood still seemed to be pouring out, a drop of blood staining the sofa. HSSH. A noise escaped from Annabeth at the sight of my wound. She quickly regained her composure, saying sorry. Soon Luke came back from the bathroom, bandages, alcohol, betadine and cotton. He got close to me, the things almost spilling from his hands at the sheer number he was carrying. Didn't know what I should get, so I just got all of it, Luke said as he looked at my deadpan face. Annabeth, with a confidence that seemed unnatural to her, said no. Soon the little girl, with slight assistance from Luke, provided some minor healing to my injury, but if I were to have something against her is that she didn't go easy on the alcohol, goddamn that stung. As I was more or less finished with my basic aid, Luke and Annabeth started gathering supplies, since sadly we didn't have much to go off, and while I could use the mist for certain things I wasn't as proficient as Ozzy as of yet. We continued gathering supplies, time by time inconvenienced by Mary. I had learned her name was Mary, kept giving us burnt cookies, which weirdly enough Annabeth seemed to enjoy. A sudden knock then reverberated across the house. Luke, did anyone aside from your mom leave here? I asked the blonde-haired boy. No, there isn't, Luke replied as he unsheathed his sword. Annabeth grabbed the knife Luke had given her and I drew my spear and transformed my spear into my Aegis shield. I started producing electricity at the tip of my spear. The pommel of the door turned, the door creaking open. I stood still and sent a bolt of lightning at the door burst into 1,000 pieces, yet what stood behind it seemed to be undamaged. A middle-aged man with an athletic figure, slim and fit, with salt and pepper hair, as a jogger, blue eyes, elfish features and a sly grin, stood behind the door. Now sister, you should be careful what you throw at people, the man said, his sly grin never disappearing from his face. You are a god, I realized as I figured out whi the man before me was. Indeed I am, he replied once again with a sly grin. Why are you here? A distinct raspy voice came from one side of the living room. It was May Castellan. Hello May, I just thought that maybe you would need some help, the bid replied back in a loving smile. Luke then sheathed his sword, walking towards the figure who, while the god didn't tower over him, it did feel like he did. Are you my dad? He questioned, a hopeful expression on his face. Yes, the god replied once again. Before any of us, maybe not the god, could realize, Luke threw a punch at the god's face, which didn't seem to affect him much. Guess I deserved that, the god replied, scratching his right cheek. He perhaps not was expecting that to be his and Luke's first interaction, though can't say I blame Luke. Why didn't you come before, when I prayed to you, when I suffered? Why? Luke yelled at his father. Luke, I couldn't interfere after learning about your fate. I was mandated by the gods to leave you and your mother. I didn't want to, but it was what I was ordered, he replied. You know about my fate? Luke questioned, suddenly averted by the fact his father knew his future. Luke ran up to the god and grabbed the collar of his t-shirt. If you weren't there for me before, at least be here for me now. Tell me what happens to me. I can't, the god replied. Luke then let go of his collar and asked a question once more. Then can you at least tell me what god you are? I am Hermes, god of messengers and thieves, Hermes replied. Good, at least I know which god to hate. Luke spat out in anger as he stormed out. Annabeth looked between Hermes and Luke as she quickly came to my side and helped me up. We started following Luke. Wait, Luke! I heard the distant, desperate yell of May, Luke's mother, and I turned backwards to see that Hermes was grabbing onto her arm while shaking his head. Hermes POV. Well, that went even worse than I imagined. I sighed aloud after being able to calm down May and led her to the sofa. Without warning, May's normally greyish eyes started lighting up in an eerie green. Great, just what I needed. I said, fucking Hades, why didn't you tell us about the curse in Delphi? May started speaking in a commanding tone similar to that of the oracle itself. 2 sons of Primordials will clash, one cursed and one possessed. Greek mythos fact, today's fact is different facts about Hermes. As a newborn infant, Hermes snuck out of his crib, stole the cattle of the god Apollo, and crafted the first lyre from a tortoise shell. Zeus was so amused by the young god's antics that he granted him a place as one of the 12 supreme gods of Olympus. Hermes transformed the telltale, herdsman Batos into a stone as punishment for reporting his theft of Apollo's cattle. He was sent by Zeus to slay the 100-eyed giant Argos Panoptes, who had been commanded by Hera to guard Zeus' paramour Io. He assisted the hero Perseus in his quest to slay the Gorgon Medusa, providing guidance and gifts from the gods. Hermes seduced the beautiful princess Chion, on the same night as his half-brother Apollon. Chapter 39, Phasing Deer. 1 month later. Galloway Forest Park, May 4, 2000. I rummaged through the leaves and bushes, lightly looking at my compass from time to time. I continued walking through the forest at a steady pace. Finally my sight caught onto something, an 8-foot-tall deer and enormous horns and an intense yellow and orange aura surrounding it. I rushed at the deer at my top speed, summoned my tendrils and sent them towards the deer. The hind seemed to notice as it raised its head as it was grazing, looked at the approaching tendrils and ran in the opposite direction. I used my tendrils, extending them for as long as I could. One of my tendrils grabbed the hind's back leg. Before I could pull the deer towards me, the deer started vibrating. My tendril locking around its angle seemed to be of no effect as the hind escaped from the locking shadowy tendril. "Oh, come on!" I yelled as I saw the deer phasing through my tendrils. I sent my tendrils towards a tree, then slung myself towards the deer's escaping form. USA, May 4, 2000. Thalia POV. "Come on quick!" I yelled at Annabeth, Luke, and Grover, a satyr who had joined us a few weeks back. "They are getting closer," I said, once again the intensifying of roars and rustling of the leaves from pursuing monsters getting closer. "Seriously, Luke, why did you keep picking fights with monsters?" I couldn't help but think as I looked at the blonde boy who had unintentionally put us in this position. All 4 of us continued running into the Long Island woods. We were getting closer to camp. We were going to make it. Aik! A sudden yelp sounded behind me as I looked back and saw Annabeth holding her ankle. She seemed to have tripped and sprained her ankle. I turned back, hurrying to her side, and helped her up. Luke rushed at us, helping Annabeth up. Grover stood before us, slightly nervous as he stammered, "Come on, we need to hurry." The noises of the approaching monsters grew even louder, and so I decided to do something which I would probably regret. Grover, Annabeth on Luke's back, and I kept running, but we were slowing down. I took a deep breath and said with the little courage I could muster, "Go on ahead, I will hold them back." "No. We aren't leaving you behind," Luke yelled back at me. "None of us are going to make it otherwise," I yelled at him, while we ran through the woods. "Grover, take them to camp. I can count on you, right?" I asked the juvenile satyr at my side. Why yes," Grover replied back. "Then go." I finished yelling as Luke, Annabeth on Luke's back, and Grover continued running. I turned back to face the monsters, unstrapping my spear and transforming my bracelet into my shield. Soon a huge pack of hellhounds started appearing from the trees as 3 of Hades' furies flew above me. Alecto the Unceasing, Tisiphone the Avenging Murder, and Magira the Grudging. "Why are coming after me?" I questioned the 3 servants of Hades. "Sadly, child, you are paying for something which your father did," Tisiphone replied with a saddened face. "Well, isn't that great?" I sighed as I summoned lightning from the sky, my spear imbued with electricity. "If I am paying for something my dad did, at least I am taking you down with me," I said with a ferocious grin. "You small child, you really believe you are getting out of here?" Alecto said in an amusing voice. "I guess we'll see," I said to the flying furies. "We shall." The 3 furies replied in unison as the pack of hellhounds before me attacked. I sent a bolt of lightning towards one of the hellhound. It hit and burst into golden dust. 2 more hellhound lunged at me as I raised my shield, their bodies, claws and fangs trying to hit me behind the shield. I used my spear, going through the 2 hellhounds' heads, bursting into golden dust. The remaining hellhounds circled me, their growling making a cacophony of sounds as the furies just flew above me, looking at me as if I were inferior. I stood my ground, the electric current from my spear crackling in the charged air. "You think you can intimidate me?" I spat at the furies, my voice laced with venom. "I'm Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus, and I won't go down without a fight." The hellhounds snarled, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. I could feel the Furies' gaze upon me, heavy with the weight of judgment. Your father's actions have consequences, Thalia, Majira hissed, her voice echoing through the trees. I laughed bitterly. Then let's see if he's watching. With a fierce cry, I unleashed a bolt of lightning, striking Alecto square in the chest. She fell, a charred figure, the bursting into golden dust sending her back to Tartarus. But the hellhounds were relentless. One leaped, its fangs bared, aiming for my throat. I sidestepped, driving my spear through its heart. It vanished in a puff of golden dust, but not before another sank its teeth into my leg. Pain exploded through me, and I stumbled, my shield clattering to the ground. Tisiphone swooped down, her face a mask of sorrowful duty. The price must be paid, she intoned. Before I could react because of the pain from the hellhound's bite, her arm thrust through my torso. Agony ripped through me, and I felt my strength waning. My vision started to darken, and as I tried speaking my final words only blood came out. So in my last moments of consciousness I started to think about my journey, Annabeth, Luke, my mother, my father, and if he even cared about me even now. Then a face popped up with black shoulder-length black hair, white pupils, and a fudgy smile. I thought to myself, sorry Ozzy, I guess you won't be able to win our bet after all. My vision dimmed, and the sounds of the forest faded, yet I continued to see his face as clearly as ever. I felt myself slipping away, the grip of the Fury's arm through my chest and the pain of the hellhound's bite releasing me. In my last moments, I smiled at all the fond memories I had gained, then tears streaming down my face at the thought of everything I had missed and would miss. My eyes started to close, and before unconsciousness fully claimed me I saw a lightning descend and strike me, charring all the hellhounds and Furies surrounding me. Greek mythos fact: today's fact will be about the Furies. The Erinyes, Furies, were three goddesses of vengeance and retribution who punished men for crimes against the natural order. They were particularly concerned with homicide, the breaking of oaths, unfilial conduct, offences against the gods, and perjury. A victim seeking justice could call down the curse of the Erinyes upon the criminal. The most powerful of these was the curse of the parent upon the child, for the Erinyes were born of just such a crime, being sprung from the blood of Uranus, when he was castrated by his son Kronos. The wrath of the Erinyes manifested itself in a number of ways. The most severe of these was the tormenting madness inflicted upon a patricide or matricide. Murderers might suffer illness or disease, and a nation harboring such a criminal could suffer dearth, and with it hunger and disease. The wrath of the Erinyes could only be placated with the right ritual purification and the completion of some task assigned for atonement. The goddesses were also servants of Hades and Persephone in the underworld, where they oversaw the torture of criminals consigned to the dungeons of the damned. Author note: I started a Patreon called Joan Judo Stories. It will end up having 10 chapters in advance, access to the secondary fanfic, will write in spare time, and polls to decide some of the future plots/characters. Chapter 40, Thalia's Tree. Long Island, May 5, 2000. Chiron POV. Dad. Odysseus' voice rung from the iris message. Did you hear me? He continued. I can't reach Thalia, my iris messages don't seem to be going through, and I am starting to get slightly worried. He finished saying in a slightly worried tone. Odysseus. I sighed, trying to find the words to explain to him the situation. Thalia was returning from her quest, but she was being pursued by hellhounds and Furies. There were too many, and so she decided to stay behind so that the other could make it. I finished saying, since there wasn't a better way I could say it. I would have liked for him to remain ignorant to Thalia's death, but that was an option I knew would be bad in the long run. It was better to tell him as soon as possible. What? He replied. She was struck down by Furies and got turned into a tree by her father. I finished explaining. Wait, so she didn't even get into Elysium? My son yelled, a furious look on his face. Probably not. I replied. I tried to calm him down since I could see his anger rising, but before I could say anything he cut the call. Galloway Forest, May 5, 2000. MC POV. I had been chasing the legendary hind, but it had escaped from me. I felt sadly bad at the hind's escape, and so I decided to try calling Thalia, since that always seemed to cheer me up. But it didn't matter how much I prayed or how big the mist rainbow I formed were, nothing seemed to be connecting me to Thalia, and I was starting to feel worried, so I decided to call my Chiron to see if he had any news. She was struck down by Furies and got turned into a tree by her father. My father's word ran cold, my mind went blank at the thought of Thalia's death. I cut the call, millions of thoughts running through my head as I kept recalling my father's words. She stayed behind to protect the other. If they hadn't been there, Thalia would have been safe. She got turned into a tree by her father. That means that her soul can't reach Elysium. I kept on thinking hundreds of thoughts on who or what to blame. But the thought that rung in my head every second was, why wasn't I there? Why wasn't I? The thought continued ringing in my head, the echoes of my own thoughts getting louder at every second. The sounds of breaking shackles ran through my body. Shadows started growing around me, stretching from all directions, my pupils and iris going black, something which I didn't notice. Then I was encased by the shadows, my thoughts still on why I wasn't with Thalia. I sunk into the surrounding shadows, and appearing once again in another forest, my sight caught onto something, the body of a 12-year-old girl with a blue aura surrounding her, encased in a tree and being locked down by roots of said tree. What? I mumbled as I noticed the shadowy form of the girl as Thalia. I slowly walked towards the tree, which now appeared to be in a hill at the edge of the camp barrier, which seemed to have grown stronger than before. I placed my hand on the bark of the tree, the rough edges betraying the figure of the girl who I considered my best friend. I am sorry, so sorry. I cried as tears started streaming down my face, my knees buckling as I fell to the first floor, my hand still on the tree's bark. I should have been with you, I shouldn't have left you alone. I cried, my tears staining the forest's humid ground. My sight caught onto two figures, one of an older boy and a younger girl, both with green auras surrounding them. They kept coming closer to Thalia, but I paid no heed, too distraught by Thalia's situation to care. We are sad, too. The small girl, Annabeth, said, tears edging out of her eyes, as she placed her hand on my shoulder. It is your fault. I whispered at still on my knees. Two tendrils appeared from my shadow as they ensnared the two demigods at my sides. It is your fault. I yelled, turning to face the two demigods who had been her companions. I started enclosing one of my fists as the tendrils circled their throats, my tendrils slowly strangling them, suffocating them. It is your fault. If you hadn't been dragging her down, she would have been safe. I yelled towards the two demigods, who couldn't say anything as I suffocated them even more. Stop! A voice yelled from the side. If it is anyone's fault, it is mine. I led them around a path that took too long. My sight caught onto who had just spoken, a satyr, juvenile to say the least, if his horns were anything to buy. I looked at the satyr, and sent a tendril grabbing his throat and hanging him in the air. The satyr flailed his legs as I cut off his air supply. Then you will die along with them, I said with a deadpan look. My sight caught onto another being, a four-legged horse running towards the tree at an almost supersonic son. Son, stop! He yelled. I looked at his face through my sight. His shadowy face couldn't hide how furious he seemed at my actions and the confusion at me being here. I couldn't look at his eyes. I sunk into my shadows, thinking back off Galloway Park. Luke Castellan POV. Cough, cough. Annabeth and I coughed and gasped for air after being strangled by Odysseus. What an asshole! I couldn't help but say aloud, I said between gasping breaths. I am sorry, Luke, Annabeth, Grover, for Odysseus' actions. Chiron said as he helped Annabeth up. It isn't your fault, Chiron, Annabeth said to our camp centaur. As thoughts of being held by my throat, gasping for air like a child, a thought entered my mind: I need to get stronger. Greek mythos fact: today's fact is another woman being turned into a tree by Zeus XD. Daphne is a mortal girl, daughter of Amyclaus 14, fond of hunting and determined to remain a virgin. She is pursued by the boy Lysippus, white stallion, who disguises himself in a girl's outfit in order to join her band of huntresses. He is also successful in gaining her innocent affection. This makes Apollo angry, and he puts it into the girl's mind to stop to bathe in the river Loddon. There, as all strip naked, the ruse is revealed, as in the myth of Callisto, and the affronted huntresses plunge their spears into Lysippus. At this moment Apollo's attention becomes engaged, and he begins his own pursuit. Daphne, fleeing to escape Apollo's advances, prays to Zeus to help. Zeus turns her into laurel tree. There are a ton of different versions in some of these. Daphne is a naiad, a type of nymph, and is saved by either Gaia or her own river godfather. Honestly, this story has like 7 different accounts, lol. Author note: I started a Patreon called Joan Judo Stories. It will end up having 10 chapters in advance, access to the secondary fanfic, will write in spare time, and polls to decide some of the future plots/characters.
Thanks for listening.